Kodiak Bear destroys helicopter landing site. 4 dead. November 22, 2025. Kodiak Bear destroys helicopter landing site. 4 dead. November 22, 2025. The wind howled across Kachemak Bay with the ferocity of a banshee as Captain Jack Dempsey performed his final pre-flight inspection of the Eurocopter AS-350B3E at the Homer Airport helipad. November in Alaska was unforgiving, and this particular morning carried an ominous weight that seemed to press down on the small coastal town like a suffocating blanket. Jack, a weathered 43-year-old pilot with over 15,000 flight hours under his belt, had flown medical evacuations throughout Alaska for the past 12 years with SkyMed emergency services. But something about this call felt different. The emergency dispatch had come in at 0347 hours from a remote hunting cabin approximately 47 miles northeast of Homer, deep in the Kenai Peninsula wilderness, where the massive Kodiak bears ruled supreme during their final feeding frenzy before winter's grip tightened completely. The patient, according to the garbled radio transmission from hunting guide Marcus Thornfield, was a 34-year-old investment banker from Seattle named Robert Caldwell, who had suffered what appeared to be a severe compound fracture of the left femur after falling from a makeshift tree stand while bow hunting for moose. Thornfield's voice had carried an edge of panic that Jack recognized from years of emergency calls, but there was something else lurking beneath the surface tension that made the pilot's instincts prickle with unease. The hunting party consisted of 4 men who had chartered a float plane from Anchorage 3 days earlier, flying into a remote lake system that required precise navigation through mountain passes, notorious for sudden weather changes and wildlife encounters that could turn deadly in seconds. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead flight paramedic for this mission, arrived at the helipad at 0415 hours, carrying her medical kit and wearing the focused expression that had earned her respect throughout Alaska's emergency medical community. At 29 years old, Sarah had completed her emergency medicine residency at Providence, Alaska Medical Center before transitioning to flight medicine, drawn by the challenge of providing critical care in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. Her petite frame belied a strength forged through countless high-stakes rescues, and her colleagues often remarked that she possessed an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. This morning, however, Jack noticed a tension in her shoulders that suggested she too sensed something ominous about this particular call. Paramedic James Morrison, a burly former Marine with 16 years of combat medical experience, completed the medical team. At 38, James had seen action in Iraq and Afghanistan before returning to Alaska, his home state, where he channeled his skills into civilian emergency services. His hands, scarred from roadside bomb fragments, moved with practiced efficiency as he secured medical equipment in the helicopter's cramped cabin. James rarely spoke about his military service, but his teammates knew that the demons of war still visited him in quiet moments, manifesting as a hypervigilance that made him exceptionally effective at reading dangerous situations before they spiraled out of control. The 4th member of the crew was rookie paramedic Kelly Martinez, fresh from the National College of EMS in New Orleans and beginning only her 3rd month with SkyMed. At 23, Kelly possessed the enthusiasm and energy typical of new graduates, but her lack of experience in Alaska's unique challenges made veteran crew members protective of her. She had specifically requested assignment to Alaska after completing her certification, driven by romantic notions of wilderness medicine that had yet to be tempered by the harsh realities of emergency response in one of America's last frontiers. Her Spanish heritage from her father's side had given her striking features and a natural warmth that patients found comforting. But her Louisiana upbringing had not prepared her for the primal dangers that lurked in Alaska's vast wilderness. As the crew completed their equipment checks and reviewed the flight plan, none of them could have anticipated that a massive 900-pound male Kodiak bear, designated by wildlife biologists as Bear 627 due to the radio collar he wore from a research project conducted 3 years earlier, was at that very moment less than 2 miles from their intended landing zone. The bear, approximately 12 years old and in his prime, had been feeding aggressively throughout October and November, building fat reserves for the approaching winter denning period. Recent salmon runs had been disappointingly sparse due to environmental factors, forcing 627 and other bears in the region to explore alternative food sources and venture into territories they typically avoided. Dr. Marcus Thornfield, the hunting guide who had placed the emergency call, possessed 22 years of experience leading hunts throughout Alaska and was considered one of the most knowledgeable outdoorsmen in the region. His client, Robert Caldwell, had paid $15,000 for a week-long guided hunt that included accommodations at Thornfield's remote cabin, which sat on a small peninsula jutting into Hidden Lake, a pristine body of water surrounded by dense spruce and hemlock forest. The cabin, constructed of massive logs harvested from the immediate area, featured all the amenities necessary for comfortable wilderness living, including a satellite communication system that had enabled Thornfield to contact emergency services after Caldwell's accident. The hunting party's other 2 members, Denver petroleum engineer Michael Torres and Portland orthopedic surgeon Dr. Benjamin Walsh, had been awakened by Caldwell's screams as he crashed through the branches of a centuries-old spruce tree, his makeshift platform giving way under his weight as he attempted to draw his compound bow on a massive bull moose that had emerged from the tree line at first light. Torres, a 41-year-old father of 3 who had saved for 5 years to afford this hunting expedition, immediately recognized the severity of Caldwell's injuries and helped Thornfield construct a crude splint using materials from their camping supplies. Walsh, despite his medical training, found himself shaken by the compound nature of the fracture and the amount of blood loss, factors that convinced Thornfield to request immediate helicopter evacuation rather than attempt the dangerous overland trek to the nearest road access point. As Jack began the startup sequence for the Eurocopter's Ariel 2B1 turboshaft engine, the morning sky began to lighten with the pale grey illumination typical of November in Alaska. Visibility was marginal, with a ceiling of approximately 800 feet, and scattered snow showers reducing horizontal visibility to roughly 3 miles. The meteorological conditions were within acceptable parameters for the flight, but they would require precise navigation and constant vigilance to avoid the mountain peaks that rose like jagged teeth from the surrounding landscape. Jack had flown in far worse conditions, but the combination of terrain, weather, and the remote location of the landing zone created a complex operational environment that demanded respect. The flight plan called for a heading of 045 degrees magnetic, following the coastline of Kachemak Bay before turning inland near the mouth of the Bradley River and following established helicopter corridors through the Kenai Mountains. The route would take them over some of the most spectacular wilderness in North America, but also some of the most unforgiving terrain on the continent. Emergency landing sites were virtually non-existent once they left the coastal areas, and mechanical failures or sudden weather deterioration could quickly transform a routine medical evacuation into a survival situation. At 0452 hours, SkyMed 847 lifted off from the Homer Airport helipad, its distinctive blue and white paint scheme quickly disappearing into the grey morning sky as Jack banked northeast toward the mountains. The helicopter's GPS navigation system indicated an estimated flight time of 37 minutes to the hunting cabin, assuming no deviations for weather or terrain. In the cabin, Dr. Chen reviewed Caldwell's medical information provided by Thornfield, noting that the patient was conscious and alert, but experiencing significant pain and showing early signs of shock from blood loss. The Eurocopter AS-350B-3E, valued at approximately $3.6 million, represented the pinnacle of single-engine helicopter technology and was specifically designed for high-altitude operations in challenging environmental conditions. Its powerful engine and advanced avionics systems made it ideal for Alaska's demanding emergency medical services. But even the most sophisticated aircraft was vulnerable to the unpredictable forces of nature that ruled the last frontier. The helicopter's rotor system generated a distinctive deep thumping sound that could be heard for miles in the still morning air, a sound that would unfortunately attract the attention of Bear 627, whose acute hearing was attuned to any unusual disturbances in his territory. As SkyMed 847 proceeded along its flight path, Bear 627 was methodically working his way through a dense alder thicket, approximately 1 mile from Thornfield's cabin, following the scent trail of a wounded moose that had passed through the area several hours earlier. The bear's massive frame, standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder and stretching over 8 feet from nose to tail, moved through the undergrowth with surprising grace, despite his considerable bulk. His thick brown fur, now approaching its winter density, provided insulation against the cold morning air, while his powerful muscles rippled beneath the surface as he navigated fallen logs and rocky outcroppings with ease. The radio collar around Bear 627's neck had been installed during a research project conducted by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game in cooperation with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. The collar contained GPS tracking technology that recorded the bear's movements every 4 hours, providing researchers with valuable data about Kodiak bear behavior patterns, territorial ranges, and feeding habits. The data collected over the past 3 years showed that 627 maintained a home range of approximately 120 square miles, with seasonal variations that followed food availability and breeding cycles. The collar also included a mortality sensor that would activate if the bear remained motionless for more than 12 hours, alerting researchers to potential death or collar malfunction. Dr. Jennifer Harrison, the lead researcher on the Kodiak Bear Tracking Project, was at that moment reviewing data from Bear 627's collar transmissions at her laboratory in Fairbanks, unaware that her research subject was about to become involved in one of the most catastrophic wildlife encounters in Alaska's history. Harrison, a wildlife biologist with 15 years of experience studying large predators, had developed a particular interest in Bear 627 due to his unusual behavior patterns and his tendency to investigate human activities rather than avoiding them as most bears did. Her research notes documented several instances where 627 had approached hunting camps and remote cabins, behavior that concerned wildlife officials but had not yet resulted in any negative encounters. As the helicopter approached the halfway point of its journey, flying at an altitude of 1,500 feet above ground level to clear the mountain ridges, Jack began receiving updated weather information from the Kenai Peninsula Aviation Weather Service. A low-pressure system moving in from the Gulf of Alaska was expected to bring deteriorating conditions throughout the morning, with increasing winds and the possibility of heavy snow showers that could reduce visibility to near zero in a matter of minutes. The weather briefing also included a wildlife advisory that had been issued the previous evening, warning pilots of increased bear activity in the region due to the late salmon runs and unusual feeding patterns that were driving the animals into areas typically avoided during this time of year. In the cabin of the helicopter, paramedic Kelly Martinez was experiencing a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she prepared for her first wilderness rescue in Alaska. Her training at the National College of EMS had included extensive classroom instruction on wilderness medicine. But nothing had truly prepared her for the reality of providing emergency medical care in one of the most remote and dangerous environments on Earth. She checked and rechecked her medical equipment, mentally rehearsing the protocols for treating traumatic injuries in field conditions while trying to calm the butterflies that seemed to have taken permanent residence in her stomach. James Morrison, seated across from Kelly, recognized the signs of pre-mission anxiety and offered quiet reassurance based on his years of experience in high-stress situations. His military background had taught him the importance of mental preparation and team cohesion, particularly when operating in environments where a single mistake could have catastrophic consequences. James had developed a reputation among his colleagues for his ability to remain calm under pressure and his skill at managing complex medical situations with limited resources, qualities that would prove invaluable in the coming hours. At the hunting cabin, Marcus Thornfield was growing increasingly concerned about Robert Caldwell's condition as they waited for the helicopter's arrival. Caldwell, a normally robust man who prided himself on his physical fitness and outdoor skills, was showing signs of deteriorating shock despite Thornfield's best efforts to keep him warm and stable. The compound fracture had resulted in significant blood loss, and the makeshift splint constructed from camping equipment was clearly inadequate for the severity of the injury. Thornfield had administered pain medication from his wilderness first aid kit, but he knew that Caldwell needed immediate professional medical attention and surgical intervention to save his leg and possibly his life. Dr. Benjamin Walsh, despite his medical training as an orthopedic surgeon, found himself feeling helpless in the wilderness environment with limited resources and equipment. His specialty dealt with similar injuries on a regular basis, but always within the controlled environment of a modern hospital with full surgical capabilities and support staff. The primitive conditions at the hunting cabin highlighted the vast difference between practicing medicine in civilization and providing emergency care in the wilderness, where improvisation and resourcefulness were often more important than medical knowledge. Michael Torres, the petroleum engineer from Denver, was struggling to cope with the psychological impact of witnessing his friend's severe injury and the realization of how quickly a routine hunting trip could transform into a life-threatening emergency. Torres had been looking forward to this expedition for months, viewing it as an opportunity to escape the pressures of his demanding job and reconnect with nature in one of the world's last true wilderness areas. The accident had shattered his romanticized view of wilderness adventure and replaced it with a stark understanding of the dangers that lurked beneath Alaska's pristine beauty. As SkyMed 847 approached the final phase of its flight, following the shoreline of Hidden Lake toward Thornfield's cabin, Bear 627 had moved to within 500 yards of the hunting party's location. The bear had been attracted by the unfamiliar scents carried on the morning breeze, including the metallic smell of blood from Caldwell's injury and the various human odors that permeated the area around the cabin. 627's acute sense of smell, estimated to be 7 times more sensitive than that of a bloodhound, allowed him to detect and analyze scents from remarkable distances, and the combination of blood and human activity had triggered his curiosity rather than his typical avoidance behavior. The bear's approach was methodical and deliberate, utilizing natural cover and terrain features to remain concealed while he gathered information about the source of the interesting scents. His massive paws, equipped with claws up to 4 inches in length, left distinctive tracks in the soft earth near the lakeshore. But the hunting party remained focused on Caldwell's medical emergency and had not yet detected any signs of the approaching predator. 627's dark brown fur provided excellent camouflage against the shadows of the dense forest, and his natural stealth capabilities allowed him to move with surprising quiet despite his enormous size. Jack Dempsey's voice crackled over the helicopter's intercom system as he announced their approach to the landing zone, requesting that the medical team prepare for immediate deployment upon touchdown. The pilot had identified a small clearing approximately 200 yards from Thornfield's cabin that appeared suitable for landing, though the confined space and surrounding tall trees would require precise maneuvering to avoid a catastrophic rotor strike. Jack's experience and skill would be tested by the challenging landing zone, but he was confident in his abilities and the helicopter's performance capabilities. The sound of the approaching helicopter reached Bear 627's sensitive ears, while the aircraft was still several miles away, creating a deep, rhythmic thumping that was unlike any natural sound in his experience. The bear's response to unfamiliar auditory stimuli was typically to retreat to a safe distance and observe, but the combination of the mechanical noise with the enticing sense that had drawn him toward the cabin created a complex sensory situation that triggered his investigative instincts rather than his flight response. 627 had encountered helicopters on previous occasions during his 12 years of life, but never in association with such strong attractant scents, and never when his winter-feeding urgency was driving him to explore every potential food source. At 05:29 hours, SkyMed 847 entered the final approach pattern for the improvised landing zone near Hidden Lake, with Jack performing a careful reconnaissance of the area to identify potential hazards and optimal approach angles. The confined space between towering spruce trees left minimal margin for error, and the pilot would need to execute a precise vertical landing with minimal forward momentum to avoid striking the surrounding vegetation. The helicopter's advanced stability systems and powerful engine would be crucial for maintaining control in the challenging environment, but ultimately, success would depend on Jack's skill and experience in similar situations. Dr. Sarah Chen prepared her medical equipment for immediate deployment, organizing trauma supplies and medications according to protocols developed specifically for wilderness emergency medicine. Her years of experience had taught her the importance of anticipating complications and preparing for multiple scenarios, particularly when dealing with traumatic injuries in remote locations where hospital backup was hours away. The compound fracture described by Thornfield could involve arterial damage, compartment syndrome, or other complications that would require immediate intervention to prevent permanent disability or death. In the cabin clearing, Marcus Thornfield heard the approaching helicopter and began preparing for the medical team's arrival by organizing his camping equipment to create as much open space as possible around Caldwell's location. The hunting guide had participated in numerous helicopter rescues throughout his career and understood the importance of facilitating rapid medical evacuation procedures. Thornfield also began gathering the personal equipment and identification documents that would need to accompany Caldwell to the hospital, including his medical insurance information and emergency contact details. Bear 627, now positioned less than 300 yards from the landing zone, had taken cover behind a massive fallen log that provided an excellent vantage point for observing the approaching aircraft. The bear's dark eyes, each roughly the size of a silver dollar, tracked the helicopter's movement with intense focus as the mechanical sound grew louder and more distinct. His powerful jaw muscles, capable of exerting over 800 pounds of pressure per square inch, worked methodically as he processed the various scents and sounds associated with this unprecedented intrusion into his territory. The helicopter's approach stirred up leaves and debris in the landing zone, creating a whirlwind of organic matter that carried scents in all directions and further stimulated Bear 627's already heightened curiosity. The combination of rotor wash, engine noise, and the complex mixture of human and mechanical odors created a sensory overload that triggered an aggressive response rather than the typical avoidance behavior exhibited by most wildlife. The bear's hackles began to rise along his massive shoulders as adrenaline flooded his system and activated the fight-or-flight response that had enabled his species to survive as apex predators for millions of years. At 0534 hours, Jack executed a flawless touchdown in the confined landing zone, bringing SkyMed 847 to rest in a small clearing barely large enough to accommodate the helicopter's 43-foot rotor diameter. The precision required for the landing was testament to Jack's skill and experience, but the tight quarters meant that the helicopter would need to maintain power on the rotors throughout the loading process to enable immediate departure if conditions deteriorated. The pilot maintained constant vigilance for wind shifts or other factors that could destabilize the aircraft in the confined space surrounded by towering trees. Dr. Chen, James Morrison, and Kelly Martinez immediately exited the helicopter, carrying their medical equipment, and began moving toward the cabin where Thornfield was caring for the injured patient. The medical team's training emphasized rapid assessment and stabilization protocols, designed to minimize scene time while ensuring adequate treatment of life-threatening injuries. Kelly felt her heart racing as she experienced her first Alaska wilderness rescue, trying to balance her excitement with the professional focus required for effective patient care. Bear 627 watched the human activity with growing agitation as his territory was invaded by an unprecedented combination of mechanical noise, rotor wash, and unfamiliar scents. The bear's natural response to territorial intrusion was to assert dominance through aggressive displays or direct confrontation, particularly during the critical pre-denning period when food resources and territorial boundaries took on heightened importance. The massive predator began moving closer to the helicopter landing zone, utilizing available cover while his aggressive instincts overcame his typical caution around human activity. The medical team reached Robert Caldwell and immediately began their assessment of his injuries, confirming Thornfield's preliminary diagnosis of a severe compound fracture with significant soft tissue damage and ongoing blood loss. Dr. Chen's examination revealed exposed bone fragments and arterial bleeding that required immediate intervention to prevent shock and potential amputation. The team worked with practiced efficiency to establish intravenous access, administer pain medication, and apply proper splinting techniques using advanced medical equipment specifically designed for wilderness rescue operations. James Morrison's combat medical experience proved invaluable as he quickly identified and addressed the bleeding issues, while Kelly assisted with medication administration and vital sign monitoring. The teamwork displayed by the medical crew reflected hundreds of hours of training and real-world experience, but the primitive conditions and limited resources created challenges that required constant adaptation and improvisation. Caldwell's condition was stable but serious, requiring immediate transport to a trauma center with full surgical capabilities. As the medical team prepared Caldwell for transport, loading him onto a specialized evacuation stretcher designed for helicopter operations, Bear 627 had moved to within 100 yards of the aircraft. The bear's massive form remained concealed behind natural vegetation, but his dark eyes never left the unusual scene unfolding in what he considered his territory. The combination of mechanical noise, human activity, and the metallic scent of blood had triggered an aggressive response that was building toward a dangerous confrontation. Dr. Chen coordinated the patient transfer with Jack Dempsey, discussing medical priorities and flight considerations for the 37-minute journey back to Homer Airport, where an ambulance would be waiting to transport Caldwell to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage. The patient's vital signs had stabilized somewhat with the medical team's interventions, but the compound fracture required surgical repair within hours to prevent complications that could result in permanent disability. At 05:47 hours, the medical team began moving Caldwell toward the helicopter on the evacuation stretcher, with James and Kelly providing medical support, while Dr. Chen maintained constant monitoring of vital signs and medication effectiveness. The transfer required careful coordination to navigate the uneven terrain between the cabin and the landing zone, while maintaining spinal immobilization and preventing further injury to the damaged limb. The team's training and experience enabled smooth execution of the complex evacuation procedure despite the challenging environmental conditions. Bear 627's patience finally reached its breaking point as the humans approached the mechanical intruder that had invaded his territory with its deafening noise and offensive odors. The massive predator's aggressive instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution and triggered by territorial invasion during a critical feeding period, overrode his learned caution around human activities. The bear began moving toward the helicopter with deliberate purpose, his enormous frame breaking through the undergrowth with increasing speed and determination. Jack Dempsey, maintaining his position at the helicopter's controls with the rotors turning at flight idle, was the first to spot the approaching bear as the massive animal emerged from the tree line approximately 50 yards from the aircraft. The pilot's years of experience in Alaska had taught him to always remain alert for wildlife encounters, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of a 900-pound Kodiak bear charging directly toward his aircraft with obvious aggressive intent. Jack immediately activated the emergency frequency on his radio and began transmitting a warning to the medical team and emergency services. SkyMed Base, SkyMed 847, we have a code red wildlife emergency at the landing zone. Large bear approaching the aircraft with hostile intent, requesting immediate assistance and advising all personnel of extreme danger. Jack's voice carried across the radio frequencies with the controlled urgency of a professional aviator facing an unprecedented emergency situation. The pilot's training included procedures for wildlife encounters, but those protocols were designed for ground operations and did not adequately address the unique challenges posed by a large predator attacking an aircraft with rotors turning. Dr. Chen looked up from her patient monitoring equipment to see Bear 627 emerging from the forest with unmistakable aggressive intent, his massive shoulders rolling with each powerful stride as he closed the distance to the helicopter. The bear's size was overwhelming, appearing even larger than the technical specifications suggested as his dark brown fur caught the morning light, and his enormous claws left deep gouges in the soft earth with each step. Chen's medical training had not included protocols for dealing with apex predators, and she felt a primal fear that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. "Everyone back to the cabin immediately! Leave the stretcher and run, Doctor!" Chen shouted to her team as the reality of their situation became clear. The medical equipment and patient transfer protocols that had seemed so important moments earlier were suddenly irrelevant in the face of a charging bear that could cover the remaining distance in seconds. Kelly Martinez felt her legs turn to jelly as she comprehended the magnitude of the threat approaching their position, her romantic notions of Alaska wilderness medicine colliding with the brutal reality of nature's power. James Morrison's military experience kicked in as he assessed the tactical situation and began moving toward the helicopter while urging his teammates to seek immediate shelter. His combat training had included procedures for dealing with dangerous wildlife in war zones, but those protocols involved weapons and defensive positions that were not available in the current medical evacuation scenario. Morrison's protective instincts toward his younger colleague Kelly overrode his own safety concerns as he positioned himself between her and the approaching bear. Bear 627's charge accelerated as he cleared the final obstacles between himself and the helicopter, his powerful hindquarters propelling his massive frame forward with surprising speed despite his enormous bulk. The bear's aggressive display included huffing vocalizations and raised hackles that indicated his intent to drive the intruders from his territory through whatever means necessary. His dark eyes remained fixed on the rotating aircraft blades that represented the most immediate threat to his dominance of the area. Jack Dempsey faced an impossible decision as he watched the bear's approach while maintaining control of the helicopter with its rotors turning at flight idle power. Taking off immediately would abandon the medical team and patient to certain death, but remaining on the ground with the aircraft posed extreme danger to everyone involved, including himself. The pilot's emergency training included scenarios for rapid evacuation under hostile conditions, but none of those protocols addressed the unique challenges posed by a large predator attack. The bear covered the final 30 yards to the helicopter in approximately 4 seconds, moving with the explosive speed that made Kodiak bears among the most dangerous predators in North America. 627's massive frame struck the aircraft's starboard landing skid with tremendous force, generating an impact that transmitted through the helicopter's structure and caused violent vibrations in the rotor system. The collision knocked the aircraft sideways approximately 6 feet and nearly caused Jack to lose control as the sudden movement disrupted the carefully balanced hover. "Mayday! Mayday! SkyMed 847 is under attack by a large bear. Aircraft has been struck and may be damaged. Requesting immediate emergency response and wildlife management assistance." Jack's voice carried across multiple radio frequencies as he struggled to maintain control of the helicopter while the bear continued its assault on the aircraft. The pilot's training had never included procedures for dealing with a direct animal attack on an active aircraft, and he was forced to improvise responses based on general emergency protocols and survival instincts. Bear 627's initial attack on the helicopter triggered an escalation of aggressive behavior as the aircraft's continued noise and movement convinced the bear that his territorial challenge was being ignored. The massive predator began a systematic assault on the helicopter, using his powerful claws and enormous strength to attack the landing gear, fuel lines, and any accessible components of the aircraft structure. His claws, each measuring up to 4 inches in length and harder than steel, easily penetrated the aluminum skin of the helicopter and began causing serious structural damage. Dr. Chen and her team, along with patient Robert Caldwell, who remained strapped to the evacuation stretcher, watched in horror from their position near the cabin as the 900-pound bear continued his devastating attack on their only means of evacuation from the remote wilderness location. The medical team's training had prepared them for many emergency scenarios, but none of their protocols addressed being stranded in bear country with a critically injured patient and no means of escape. The bear's claws found the helicopter's fuel lines during his assault, rupturing the pressurized system and causing aviation fuel to spray across the landing zone, while creating an extreme fire hazard that added another layer of danger to the already catastrophic situation. Jack realized that the aircraft was taking serious damage and that continued operation might not be possible even if he could somehow escape the bear's attack. The pilot began emergency shutdown procedures while preparing for the possibility that the helicopter would be a total loss. Bear 627's attack intensified as the scent of aviation fuel added to the complex mixture of odors that had originally attracted his attention to the landing zone. The bear's sensitive nose detected the chemical smell of jet fuel and associated it with the territorial threat posed by the mechanical intruder. His aggressive response included attempting to bite and claw the rotor blades an action that could prove catastrophic for both the bear and anyone in the vicinity if the massive predator made contact with the spinning metal. Kelly Martinez watched the destruction of the helicopter with growing panic as she realized that their situation had transformed from a routine medical evacuation into a survival scenario in one of the most dangerous wilderness environments on Earth. Her training at the National College of EMS had included wilderness medicine protocols, but those courses had focused on providing medical care rather than surviving encounters with apex predators. The young paramedic felt overwhelmed by the reality that they were now stranded with a critically injured patient and limited supplies in bear country. James Morrison's military experience had taught him to assess tactical situations and develop contingency plans. But the current scenario presented challenges that exceeded anything he had encountered during his combat deployments. The team was trapped at a remote cabin with no immediate means of evacuation, a critically injured patient requiring urgent medical care, and an aggressive bear that had just destroyed their aircraft. Morrison began mentally inventorying their available resources and considering defensive options. At 0551 hours, Bear 627 managed to flip the helicopter onto its side through a combination of massive strength and leverage applied against the damaged landing gear. The aircraft's rotor blades struck the ground with tremendous force, shattering into deadly fragments that scattered across the landing zone, while the engine experienced catastrophic failure due to the sudden orientation change. The destruction of SkyMed 847 was complete, representing a total loss of the $3.6 million aircraft and eliminating any possibility of immediate evacuation for the stranded medical team and patient. Jack Dempsey had managed to escape from the aircraft seconds before it was overturned, but found himself in the extremely dangerous position of being on foot in close proximity to an aggressive Kodiak bear. The pilot's survival training included basic wilderness protocols, but nothing had prepared him for direct confrontation with a massive predator in its natural habitat. Jack began backing away from the destroyed helicopter, while making himself appear as large as possible and avoiding direct eye contact with the bear. The sound of the helicopter's destruction echoed across Hidden Lake and the surrounding wilderness, creating a cacophony of breaking metal, shattering rotor blades, and mechanical failure that could be heard for miles in the still morning air. The noise attracted the attention of other wildlife in the area, including the scattered members of a nearby wolf pack and several smaller black bears who began moving toward the disturbance to investigate the unusual sounds and potential feeding opportunity. Dr. Chen realized that their priorities had shifted dramatically from patient evacuation to immediate survival as she assessed their current situation with the helicopter destroyed and an aggressive bear still present in the immediate area. Caldwell's medical condition remained serious and required ongoing care, but the team's focus now had to include defensive preparations and consideration of alternative evacuation methods that could take days to arrange in the remote wilderness location. Bear 627, having successfully driven the mechanical intruder from his territory through decisive action, began investigating the wreckage of the helicopter while remaining alert for any signs that the threat might return. The bear's aggressive behavior had been triggered by territorial invasion during a critical feeding period, and his successful defense of the area reinforced his dominant position in the local ecosystem. The massive predator's investigation of the aircraft wreckage was methodical and thorough, seeking to understand the nature of the defeated threat. Marcus Thornfield, the experienced hunting guide, emerged from the cabin carrying a .300 Winchester Magnum rifle and began assessing the tactical situation with the cool professionalism that had kept him alive during 22 years of guiding hunts in Alaska's most dangerous wilderness areas. Thornfield's experience with aggressive bears had taught him that the immediate aftermath of a territorial confrontation was often the most dangerous period, as the successful predator's confidence might lead to further aggressive behavior toward humans in the area. The destruction of the helicopter had scattered debris across the landing zone, creating a complex obstacle field that would complicate any defensive actions, while also providing potential cover for both humans and the bear. Aviation fuel continued to leak from the ruptured fuel system, creating a fire hazard that added another element of danger to the already complex survival situation. The metallic debris and fuel contamination would also leave a permanent scar on the pristine wilderness environment. Dr. Benjamin Walsh, despite his medical training and professional experience with trauma cases, found himself psychologically overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of their situation from a routine hunting trip to a life-threatening survival scenario. The orthopedic surgeon's specialized knowledge was valuable for treating Caldwell's injuries, but his lack of wilderness experience made him feel helpless in the face of the immediate threats posed by their isolation and the presence of an aggressive predator. Michael Torres, the petroleum engineer from Denver, struggled to process the rapid sequence of events that had destroyed their rescue helicopter and stranded them in bear country with a critically injured friend. Torres's engineering background had taught him to analyze complex problems and develop systematic solutions, but the current crisis involved variables and threats that were completely outside his professional experience and expertise. At 05:57 hours, emergency radio transmissions from the destroyed helicopter's emergency locator beacon began reaching rescue coordination centers throughout Alaska, triggering massive search and rescue operations that would eventually involve multiple agencies and hundreds of personnel. The beacon's GPS coordinates provided exact location information, but the remote wilderness location and adverse weather conditions would complicate any immediate rescue attempts. The emergency frequency transmissions also included Jack's final radio calls describing the bear attack, providing rescue coordinators with critical information about the nature of the emergency. The Alaska Rescue Coordination Center at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson immediately classified the emergency as a Priority 1 incident due to the aircraft destruction, crew in immediate danger, and medical emergency requiring urgent evacuation. Colonel Patricia Williams, the center's commanding officer, began coordinating response efforts that would involve Coast Guard helicopters, Alaska State Troopers, fish and game officers with wildlife expertise, and medical personnel equipped for wilderness rescue operations. Dr. Jennifer Harrison, the wildlife biologist tracking Bear 627 through his GPS collar, received an automated alert indicating that her research subject was involved in unusual activity at the exact coordinates where the helicopter emergency was occurring. Harrison's computer systems showed that the bear had remained stationary at the incident location for over 6 minutes, behavior that was completely inconsistent with his normal movement patterns and suggested a significant event requiring investigation. Bear 627 had completed his initial investigation of the helicopter wreckage and was now patrolling the perimeter of his successfully defended territory, maintaining a vigilant watch for any additional threats while also monitoring the human activity around the hunting cabin. The bear's aggressive response to territorial invasion had been successful, but his continued presence in the immediate area posed an ongoing threat to the survival of the stranded humans. The medical team huddled around Robert Caldwell inside the hunting cabin, maintaining his IV fluids and pain management while discussing their limited options for dealing with the survival situation. Dr. Chen's emergency medicine training had included wilderness protocols, but those procedures assumed eventual evacuation by helicopter or other mechanized transport. The current scenario, with their evacuation aircraft destroyed and an aggressive bear controlling the immediate area, required completely different survival strategies. James Morrison began organizing the cabin's defenses and inventorying available supplies while considering the tactical implications of their situation. The hunting party's firearms included several high-powered rifles suitable for large game hunting, but engaging a 900-pound bear in close combat presented extreme risks even with adequate weapons. Morrison's military experience had taught him that defensive positions were preferable to direct confrontation whenever possible. Kelly Martinez attempted to process the psychological trauma of witnessing the helicopter's destruction while maintaining her professional focus on patient care responsibilities. The young paramedic's training had prepared her for emergency medicine, but nothing had equipped her to deal with the emotional impact of being stranded in a survival situation with their primary means of escape eliminated by a massive predator. The hunting cabin's supplies included food and water for several days, along with camping equipment, hunting gear, and basic medical supplies from Thornfield's Wilderness First Aid Kit. However, the cabin was not designed to serve as a long-term shelter for 7 people, particularly with one critically injured patient requiring ongoing medical care. The group would need to carefully manage their resources while awaiting rescue operations that might take days to reach their remote location. Weather conditions began deteriorating as predicted, with increasing winds and scattered snow showers that would complicate search and rescue operations. The approaching low-pressure system carried the potential for heavy snowfall that could make helicopter operations impossible and force rescue teams to attempt dangerous overland approaches through bear country. The weather deterioration also increased the urgency of the survival situation by adding exposure and hypothermia to the list of immediate threats. At 0615 hours, the first rescue helicopter dispatched from the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center encountered severe turbulence and icing conditions that forced the crew to return to base without reaching the emergency location. Coast Guard helicopter crews reported that weather conditions throughout the Kenai Peninsula were rapidly deteriorating beyond safe operational limits, effectively grounding rescue operations until the storm system passed through the area. Dr. Chen realized that their medical support for Robert Caldwell would need to be sustained for an indefinite period, possibly days, using only the supplies available at the hunting cabin and whatever remained salvageable from the helicopter's medical equipment. Caldwell's compound fracture required ongoing attention to prevent infection and monitor for complications such as compartment syndrome or arterial damage that could result in amputation or death. Bear 627 had expanded his patrol area to include the shoreline of Hidden Lake, establishing a territorial boundary that encompassed the destroyed helicopter, the hunting cabin, and the immediate surrounding area. The bear's behavior indicated that he considered the successful defense of his territory to be an ongoing responsibility rather than a completed action, suggesting that he would continue to pose a threat to any human activity in the area. Marcus Thornfield's experience with bear behavior led him to conclude that 627's continued presence was highly unusual and posed extreme danger to the group's survival prospects. Most bears would have retreated after successfully driving off a perceived threat, but 627's decision to maintain his position suggested either unusually aggressive territorial behavior or possible habituation to human activity that had reduced his natural avoidance instincts. The destruction of SkyMed 847 represented one of the most expensive wildlife-related aircraft losses in Alaska's history, with the total value of the helicopter exceeding $3.6 million, in addition to the extensive medical equipment destroyed in the crash. The incident would eventually trigger comprehensive reviews of emergency medical service protocols for operations in areas with high concentrations of large predators. Communication with the outside world remained possible through the cabin's satellite communication system, but the equipment's limited battery life and the deteriorating weather conditions made maintaining contact with rescue coordinators increasingly difficult. Thornfield had been conserving battery power since placing the initial emergency call, but extended isolation would require careful management of their communication capabilities. Dr. Benjamin Walsh began experiencing symptoms of acute stress reaction as the reality of their situation became clear, including difficulty concentrating, elevated heart rate, and intrusive thoughts about potential outcomes of their survival scenario. The surgeon's lack of wilderness experience and exposure to life-threatening situations outside the controlled hospital environment made him particularly vulnerable to psychological impacts of the crisis. Michael Torres attempted to maintain morale among the group while privately struggling with guilt over his role in convincing Caldwell to participate in the hunting expedition that had resulted in the current life-threatening situation. The petroleum engineer's analytical nature led him to constantly review the sequence of events and consider alternative decisions that might have prevented the catastrophic outcome. At 0642 hours, Alaska State Troopers Wildlife Officer Daniel Kowalski received emergency dispatch orders to coordinate with rescue operations and provide expertise on dealing with aggressive bear behavior during the rescue attempts. Kowalski, a 20-year veteran of Alaska law enforcement with extensive experience in human-wildlife conflicts, began assembling specialized equipment, including bear deterrent systems and high-powered rifles suitable for stopping large predators. The weather system moving through the Kenai Peninsula brought with it not only dangerous flying conditions, but also dropping temperatures that increased the risk of hypothermia for anyone forced to remain outdoors. The hunting cabin's heating system relied on a wood-burning stove that required constant fuel gathering and maintenance, tasks that would become extremely dangerous with an aggressive bear patrolling the immediate area. Dr. Jennifer Harrison contacted the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center to provide behavioral analysis of Bear 627 based on 3 years of GPS tracking data, warning rescue coordinators that the bear exhibited unusually aggressive territorial behavior and showed limited fear of human activities. Harrison's research data indicated that 627 had previously investigated hunting camps and remote cabins, behavior that was atypical for most Kodiak bears and suggested possible habituation or food conditioning. Bear 627's continued presence near the crash site began attracting other wildlife drawn by the scent of aviation fuel, scattered food from the helicopter's emergency supplies, and the unusual level of activity in the normally quiet wilderness area. A small pack of wolves had moved to within a mile of the location, while several ravens began circling overhead, attracted by the potential feeding opportunity represented by the destruction and chaos. James Morrison's assessment of their defensive capabilities included the hunting party's firearms, Thornfield's .300 Winchester Magnum Doctor, Walsh's .30-06 Springfield, Torres's .270 Winchester, and Caldwell's compound bow, which remained undamaged despite his accident. The weapons provided adequate firepower for defense against bear attack, but ammunition supplies were limited, and the confined space around the cabin would make effective shooting difficult and dangerous. Kelly Martinez began displaying early symptoms of acute stress disorder, including hypervigilance, difficulty sleeping, and intrusive memories of the helicopter's destruction. The young paramedic's lack of experience with traumatic situations outside the medical environment made her particularly vulnerable to psychological impacts that could compromise her ability to provide effective patient care for Caldwell. The satellite communication system allowed Thornfield to maintain sporadic contact with rescue coordinators, but the deteriorating weather conditions and limited battery life meant that communication windows were becoming increasingly brief and unreliable. Each contact provided updates on rescue attempts and weather forecasts, but also reinforced the reality that immediate evacuation was impossible due to conditions beyond anyone's control. At 0708 hours, Dr. Chen observed early signs of infection developing around Caldwell's compound fracture site, indicated by increased swelling, elevated skin temperature, and subtle changes in the wound's appearance. The development of infection in a wilderness setting with limited antibiotic supplies posed a serious threat to Caldwell's survival prospects and added urgency to the need for professional medical evacuation. Bear 627 had discovered the scattered remains of the helicopter's emergency food supplies, including high-energy survival rations that had been dispersed during the aircraft's destruction. The Bear's investigation of these unfamiliar food sources reinforced his decision to maintain territorial control over the area, while also introducing human food scents that could further condition his behavior towards seeking human-associated food sources. The morning's events had attracted the attention of local news media after emergency radio transmissions were monitored by aviation enthusiasts and emergency service scanners. Initial reports described a helicopter crash in the Kenai Peninsula wilderness, but details about the Bear attack and crew survival status remained uncertain due to communication difficulties and weather-related obstacles to news-gathering operations. Marcus Thornfield's decades of experience in Alaska wilderness had taught him that survival in bear country required constant vigilance and careful management of food scents, garbage, and other attractants that could draw predator attention. The destruction of the helicopter had scattered potential attractants across a wide area while eliminating the group's ability to remove themselves from the dangerous situation through normal evacuation procedures. Dr. Chen made the difficult decision to begin rationing medical supplies while maintaining essential care for Caldwell's injuries, recognizing that their isolation could extend for several days, depending on weather conditions and rescue operation logistics. The compound fracture required ongoing monitoring and treatment, but conservation of limited antibiotic supplies and pain medication became a critical consideration for long-term survival planning. The psychological stress of their situation began affecting different group members in various ways, with some individuals becoming hypervigilant and others withdrawing into themselves as coping mechanisms. James Morrison's military experience helped him maintain tactical awareness and leadership capabilities, but even his combat-tested resilience was challenged by the unique combination of threats posed by their current circumstances. At 0734 hours, weather conditions temporarily improved enough to allow a brief reconnaissance flight by an Alaska State Trooper helicopter. But the crew was unable to land due to the presence of Bear 627 in the landing zone, and debris from the destroyed aircraft scattered across the only suitable touchdown area. The reconnaissance confirmed that the medical team and hunting party appeared to be alive and taking shelter in the cabin, but immediate evacuation remained impossible. The brief aerial reconnaissance provided rescue coordinators with visual confirmation of the helicopter's complete destruction and the massive size of the bear responsible for the attack. Video footage captured during the flyover showed Bear 627 clearly patrolling the immediate area and investigating the aircraft wreckage, behavior that wildlife experts found extremely concerning due to its persistence and apparent lack of fear regarding human activities. Dr. Benjamin Walsh's stress-related symptoms intensified following the failed rescue attempt, as the reality of extended isolation in bear country overwhelmed his psychological coping mechanisms. The surgeon began experiencing panic attacks characterized by rapid heartbeat, difficulty breathing, and irrational fears about their survival prospects that required intervention from other group members to prevent complete psychological breakdown. Michael Torres attempted to maintain group morale by organizing resource management activities and establishing work schedules for essential survival tasks. But the underlying tension created by their dangerous situation made normal social interactions increasingly difficult. The petroleum engineer's leadership efforts were complicated by his own guilt over the hunting trip that had resulted in their predicament. Bear 627's behavior patterns observed during the reconnaissance flight confirmed Dr. Harrison's assessment that the bear exhibited unusually aggressive territorial behavior and showed no signs of natural retreat following his successful defense of the area. Wildlife experts consulting with rescue coordinators concluded that normal bear deterrent methods would likely be ineffective and that armed intervention might be necessary to enable safe evacuation of the stranded personnel. The hunting cabin's wood supply became a critical survival resource as temperatures dropped and weather conditions deteriorated. But gathering additional fuel would require venturing outside the relative safety of the building into an area actively patrolled by an aggressive 900-pound predator. Thornfield's assessment of their fuel reserves indicated that careful rationing might sustain them for 3 to 4 days before running out of heating capacity. Kelly Martinez's training in emergency medicine proved valuable for supporting Dr. Chen's care of Robert Caldwell, but her lack of experience with extended wilderness survival created anxiety about her ability to contribute effectively to the group's overall survival efforts. The young paramedic's confidence was further shaken by the realization that her romantic expectations about Alaska wilderness medicine bore no resemblance to the brutal reality of their current situation. At 0801 hours, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game authorized emergency protocols for dealing with an aggressive bear that posed immediate threats to human life, including permission for lethal intervention if necessary to enable rescue operations. Wildlife Officer Daniel Kowalski began coordinating with rescue teams to develop strategies for safely neutralizing Bear 627, while minimizing risks to the stranded personnel. The deteriorating weather conditions brought heavy snowfall that reduced visibility to near zero and created additional challenges for maintaining the cabin's heating system, while also making any outdoor activities extremely dangerous. The combination of bear threat and severe weather effectively trapped the group inside the small cabin with limited supplies and a critically injured patient requiring constant medical attention. Dr. Chen's monitoring of Caldwell's condition revealed stabilized vital signs, but continuing concern about infection development and the long-term prognosis for his severely damaged leg. The compound fracture required surgical intervention that could not be provided in the wilderness setting, making successful evacuation critical for preventing permanent disability or life-threatening complications. Bear 627 adapted to the changing weather conditions by taking shelter near the helicopter wreckage while maintaining his territorial patrol patterns around the landing zone and cabin area. The bear's thick winter coat provided excellent insulation against the cold and snow, giving him significant advantages over the human occupants who were dependent on artificial heating and shelter for survival. James Morrison's military experience with extreme weather operations helped him organize the group's survival efforts, including establishment of watch schedules, resource management protocols, and emergency procedures for potential bear encounters. His leadership proved essential for maintaining group cohesion and preventing panic-related decisions that could compromise their safety. The satellite communication system's battery began showing signs of depletion after hours of emergency communications, forcing Thornfield to limit contact with rescue coordinators to brief scheduled updates. The loss of reliable communication would effectively isolate the group from outside assistance, while also preventing rescue teams from receiving real-time updates on their condition and needs. At 0847 hours, a second rescue helicopter attempted to reach the location, but was forced to abort the mission due to severe icing conditions and turbulence that exceeded safe operational limits. Coast Guard rescue coordinators reported that weather conditions throughout the region were expected to remain dangerous for helicopter operations for at least another 12 to 18 hours. Dr. Jennifer Harrison's analysis of Bear 627's GPS tracking data revealed that the Bear had not moved more than 200 yards from the crash site since the helicopter's destruction, behavior that was unprecedented in her research observations and suggested an unusual level of territorial attachment to the specific location. Harrison warned rescue coordinators that the Bear's behavior indicated possible long-term occupation of the area that could persist for days or weeks. The group's food supplies, originally intended to support the hunting party for their remaining days at the cabin, required careful rationing to accommodate the additional medical team members and potential extended isolation. Thornfield's wilderness experience proved valuable for organizing meal planning and resource conservation, but the psychological stress of their situation made normal eating patterns difficult to maintain. Kelly Martinez began experiencing nightmares and intrusive thoughts related to the helicopter's destruction, symptoms that interfered with her to rest effectively and compromised her capacity to assist with medical care duties. The young paramedic's psychological deterioration added another layer of complexity to the group's survival challenges while reducing their available medical support capabilities. The heavy snowfall created additional insulation around the cabin that helped conserve heat, but also made it more difficult to monitor Bear 627's location and movements around their position. The reduced visibility provided some concealment for the Bear's activities, while making it nearly impossible for the human occupants to maintain effective surveillance of their immediate environment. Dr. Benjamin Walsh's panic attacks became more frequent and severe as the reality of their extended isolation became clear, requiring intervention from other group members and reducing his ability to contribute to Caldwell's medical care. The surgeon's psychological breakdown illustrated the dramatic difference between practicing medicine in controlled hospital environments versus survival situations in hostile wilderness conditions. Michael Torres attempted to maintain detailed records of their situation for potential future investigation, while also documenting resource consumption and survival decisions that might prove important for rescue operations or subsequent analysis. The petroleum engineer's methodical approach provided some psychological comfort through the illusion of control over their uncontrollable circumstances. At 0923 hours, rescue coordinators received approval for emergency wildlife management protocols that would authorize armed intervention against Bear 627 if necessary to enable safe evacuation of the stranded personnel. The decision represented acknowledgement that normal Bear management techniques were inadequate for dealing with the unprecedented aggressive behavior displayed by the massive predator. Bear 627's continued investigation of the helicopter wreckage included attempts to access the aircraft's interior compartments, behavior that scattered additional debris across the landing zone, while also exposing the Bear to aviation fuel and hydraulic fluids that could affect his health and behavior patterns. Wildlife experts expressed concern that chemical exposure might alter the Bear's normal behavioral responses and make him even more unpredictable. The cabin's heating system required constant attention to maintain adequate temperature for survival, but fuel-gathering activities were impossible due to Bear 627's presence in the immediate area. Thornfield estimated that their remaining wood supply would last approximately 36 hours with careful conservation, after which they would face life-threatening exposure if rescue operations had not succeeded. Dr. Chen's assessment of their medical supplies revealed adequate materials for basic wound care and infection prevention, but limited antibiotics and pain medication that would be exhausted within 48 hours if Caldwell's condition continued to require intensive treatment. The prospect of providing medical care without adequate pharmaceutical support added urgency to rescue operations while highlighting the critical nature of their isolation. James Morrison organized defensive preparations, including positioning of firearms, establishment of fields of fire, and coordination of responsibilities in case Bear 627 attempted to attack the cabin directly. The military veterans' tactical planning provided some psychological comfort for group members, while also ensuring that they would be prepared for the worst-case scenario of direct predator assault. The psychological stress of their situation manifested differently among group members, with some individuals becoming increasingly withdrawn, while others displayed hypervigilance and aggressive responses to minor stresses. The confined space of the cabin intensified personality conflicts and made group dynamics increasingly difficult to manage as their isolation extended into its second day. At 10:04 hours, weather conditions showed slight improvement that enabled brief helicopter reconnaissance missions, but landing attempts remained impossible due to debris in the landing zone and Bear 627's continued aggressive territorial behavior. Aerial observation confirmed that the Bear had constructed what appeared to be a temporary den site near the helicopter wreckage, suggesting possible long-term occupation of the area. The news media attention surrounding the incident intensified as details about the Bear attack became available through emergency service communications and interviews with aviation officials. Early reports focused on the dramatic nature of the helicopter destruction while emphasizing the unprecedented nature of a large predator successfully attacking and destroying a modern aircraft. Dr. Jennifer Harrison provided additional behavioral analysis indicating that Bear 627's den construction near the crash site represented claiming behavior typically associated with food sources or prime territorial locations. The wildlife biologist warned that the bear's psychological association of the area with successful territorial defense could create long-term occupation patterns that would persist well beyond the immediate crisis. Kelly Martinez's deteriorating psychological condition required increasing attention from other group members, reducing the available personnel for essential survival tasks while adding caregiver burden to an already stressed situation. The young paramedic's training had not prepared her for the psychological trauma of witnessing aircraft destruction and being trapped in a survival scenario with limited resources. The satellite communication system's declining battery capacity forced increasingly brief and infrequent contact with rescue coordinators, limiting the group's ability to provide updates on their condition while also reducing their access to weather forecasts and rescue operation status reports. The gradual loss of outside communication increased their psychological isolation while reducing coordination capabilities with rescue efforts. Bear 627's behavioral patterns showed increasing familiarity with the crash site environment as he established regular patrol routes and investigation schedules that brought him into close proximity to the cabin multiple times throughout each day. The bear's comfort level in the area suggested that normal deterrent methods would be ineffective, and that his territorial claims were becoming more entrenched with each passing hour. Dr. Chen made the difficult decision to reduce Caldwell's pain medication dosage to extend their pharmaceutical supplies, requiring careful monitoring of his condition while balancing pain management against the need to conserve limited resources for potential long-term care. The compound fracture continued to show signs of healing, But infection concerns remained elevated due to the wilderness environment and limited sterile supplies. At 11:47 hours, Alaska State Troopers Wildlife Officer Daniel Kowalski arrived at a staging area approximately 5 miles from the crash site, carrying specialized equipment for bear deterrent and lethal intervention if necessary to enable rescue operations. Kowalski's 20 years of experience with human-wildlife conflicts would prove essential for developing strategies to safely approach the area controlled by Bear 627. The heavy snowfall created drifting patterns around the cabin that would complicate escape routes, while also making it more difficult to maintain adequate ventilation for the wood-burning heating system. Thornfield's wilderness experience enabled him to manage these challenges, but the additional complications added stress to an already complex survival situation. Marcus Thornfield began rationing the cabin's food supplies more strictly as the reality of extended isolation became clear, establishing meal schedules designed to maintain adequate nutrition while stretching available resources to cover potential rescue delays of up to 1 week. The hunting guide's experience with wilderness survival proved invaluable for managing the group's basic needs. Dr. Benjamin Walsh's psychological condition continued to deteriorate despite efforts by other group members to provide support and reassurance, with his panic attacks becoming more frequent and severe as their isolation extended. The surgeon's breakdown illustrated the importance of psychological preparation for wilderness survival situations and the vulnerability of individuals without outdoor experience. Michael Torres documented their survival decisions and resource management activities with methodical precision, creating records that might prove valuable for future wilderness emergency protocols, while also providing himself with a sense of purpose and control during an uncontrollable situation. The petroleum engineer's analytical approach helped maintain some semblance of normal problem-solving activities. The psychological dynamics within the cabin became increasingly strained as personality conflicts emerged under the stress of their survival situation, with different individuals displaying varying tolerance levels for uncertainty and different approaches to crisis management. James Morrison's military leadership helped mediate conflicts while maintaining focus on essential survival activities. At 12:23 hours, rescue coordinators approved emergency protocols authorizing lethal intervention against Bear 627 if necessary to enable safe evacuation of the stranded personnel, acknowledging that normal wildlife management techniques were inadequate for dealing with the unprecedented territorial behavior displayed by the massive predator. The decision reflected the critical nature of their situation and the exhaustion of non-lethal alternatives. Bear 627's investigation of the helicopter wreckage became more systematic and thorough as he established familiarity with the crash site, including attempts to access interior compartments and examination of scattered equipment that might provide information about the nature of the mechanical intruder he had successfully defeated. The bear's behavior suggested intelligence and curiosity that exceeded typical predator responses to territorial intrusion. The deteriorating weather conditions created additional survival challenges, including increased heating requirements, ventilation difficulties, and psychological stress related to prolonged confinement in the small cabin space. The combination of external threats and internal environmental challenges tested the group's resilience and cooperation capabilities. Dr. Chen's medical assessment of Robert Caldwell revealed stable but concerning developments, including early signs of infection that would require antibiotic intervention within the next 24 hours to prevent serious complications. The compound fracture showed some improvement in alignment due to the stabilization procedures, but definitive surgical repair remained essential for optimal healing and function restoration. James Morrison's tactical assessment of their defensive capabilities included evaluation of sightlines, available ammunition, and coordination requirements for effective response to potential bear attack on the cabin structure. The military veterans' planning provided psychological comfort while ensuring adequate preparation for worst-case scenarios. The news media coverage of the incident expanded to include expert interviews with wildlife biologists, aviation safety specialists, and wilderness survival experts who provided context for the unprecedented nature of a large predator successfully attacking and destroying a modern helicopter. The story captured public attention due to its dramatic elements and the ongoing uncertainty about rescue prospects. At 13:09 hours, Wildlife Officer Daniel Kowalski began coordinating with rescue helicopter crews to develop approach strategies that would minimize bear encounter risks while enabling effective evacuation of the stranded personnel. Kowalski's expertise with dangerous wildlife situations proved essential for planning operations in an area controlled by an aggressive 900-pound predator. Kelly Martinez's psychological condition stabilized somewhat as she focused on assisting with Robert Caldwell's medical care, finding purpose and distraction through professional responsibilities despite her underlying trauma from witnessing the helicopter's destruction. The young paramedics' training provided a framework for useful activity during their extended isolation. The satellite communication system's battery reached critical levels, forcing Thornfield to limit communications to essential emergency updates while conserving power for potential rescue coordination requirements. The gradual loss of outside contact increased their psychological isolation while reducing access to weather forecasts and rescue operation status information. Bear 627's territorial patrol patterns expanded to include regular investigation of the cabin's immediate perimeter, bringing the massive predator to within 30 yards of the building multiple times throughout the afternoon. The bear's proximity created constant tension among the human occupants while making any outdoor activities extremely dangerous. Dr. Jennifer Harrison's continued analysis of GPS tracking data confirmed that Bear 627 had established the crash site as his primary territorial focus, with movement patterns indicating possible permanent occupation of the area that could persist for weeks or months. The wildlife biologist's assessment provided critical information for rescue planning while highlighting the unusual nature of the bear's behavioral response. The cabin's wood fuel supply continued to diminish despite careful conservation efforts, with Thornfield estimating less than 24 hours of adequate heating capacity remaining if consumption patterns continued at current levels. The prospect of losing heating capability during severe winter weather added life-threatening urgency to rescue operations. Michael Torres attempted to maintain group morale through organization of activities and establishment of routines that provided psychological structure during their uncontrolled situation. But the underlying stress of their predicament made normal social interactions increasingly difficult to sustain. The petroleum engineers' efforts helped prevent complete psychological breakdown among some group members. At 14:45 hours, rescue coordinators received updated weather forecasts indicating potential improvement in flying conditions within the next 6 to 8 hours, providing hope for renewed evacuation attempts while acknowledging that Bear 627's territorial behavior would still pose significant challenges to successful rescue operations. The afternoon brought subtle changes in Bear 627's behavior patterns as he appeared to become more comfortable with the human presence in his claimed territory, reducing his active patrol activities while maintaining constant awareness of cabin activities through acute sensory monitoring. Wildlife experts interpreted this behavioral shift as potential habituation that could make future deterrent efforts more difficult. Dr. Chen's ongoing assessment of their medical supplies revealed adequate materials for basic care, but critical shortages in antibiotics and advanced wound care materials that would become essential if Caldwell's condition deteriorated or if other group members sustained injuries during their extended isolation. The medical limitations added another layer of vulnerability to their survival situation. James Morrison organized the group's defensive preparations for potential nighttime bear activity, including establishment of watch schedules and coordination of response procedures if Bear 627 attempted to investigate or attack the cabin structure directly. The military veterans' tactical planning helped maintain readiness while providing psychological comfort through preparedness activities. The psychological stress of extended isolation began manifesting in different ways among group members, with some individuals becoming increasingly withdrawn, while others displayed hypervigilance and elevated anxiety levels that interfered with normal cognitive function. The confined cabin space intensified these psychological challenges while limiting options for stress management. Dr. Benjamin Walsh's condition showed slight improvement as he adapted to their survival situation through acceptance of circumstances beyond his control. But his lack of wilderness experience continued to make him vulnerable to panic responses when reminded of their isolation and danger. The surgeon's psychological journey illustrated the importance of mental resilience in survival situations. At 15:21 hours, Wildlife Officer Daniel Kowalski completed his approach strategy for dealing with Bear 627, including positioning of deterrent equipment and coordination with helicopter crews for potential rescue operations once weather conditions improved sufficiently to enable safe flying. Kowalski's expertise provided the foundation for renewed evacuation attempts. The heavy snowfall began to diminish slightly, creating hope for improved visibility and potential helicopter operations, while also revealing the full extent of debris scattered around the crash site by Bear 627's destruction of the aircraft. The wreckage field would complicate any landing attempts while providing evidence of the massive bear's incredible strength and determination. Bear 627's investigation of the helicopter wreckage continued throughout the afternoon as he systematically examined scattered equipment and interior components that had been exposed during his initial attack on the aircraft. The bear's thorough exploration suggested intelligence and curiosity that exceeded typical predator behavior patterns. Kelly Martinez's recovery from her initial psychological trauma enabled her to resume more active participation in group survival activities, including assistance with medical care duties and contribution to resource management efforts. The young paramedic's resilience demonstrated the human capacity for adaptation even under extreme stress conditions. The deteriorating condition of their satellite communication equipment forced increasingly creative conservation measures to maintain minimal contact with rescue coordinators while preserving battery power for essential emergency communications. The gradual loss of outside contact increased their psychological isolation while reducing coordination capabilities. Dr. Chen made difficult decisions about medical resource allocation as their isolation extended beyond initial expectations, balancing immediate patient care needs against the possibility of extended survival requirements that could exhaust their pharmaceutical supplies. The wilderness medicine challenges exceeded anything in her training experience. At 16:47 hours, rescue coordinators received confirmation that weather conditions were beginning to improve sufficiently to enable limited helicopter operations. But Bear 627's continued territorial control of the landing zone would require wildlife management intervention before safe evacuation could be attempted, Marcus Thornfield's assessment of their remaining survival resources indicated critical shortages in heating fuel and food supplies that would become life-threatening within the next 36 hours if rescue operations were not successful. The hunting guide's wilderness experience provided realistic evaluation of their time limitations. The afternoon light began to fade as evening approached, bringing with it dropping temperatures and the psychological challenges associated with their second night of isolation in bear country. The group's mental state reflected the accumulated stress of extended survival challenges, combined with uncertainty about rescue prospects. Michael Torres continued his methodical documentation of their survival experience, while privately struggling with guilt over his role in organizing the hunting expedition that had resulted in their life-threatening predicament. The petroleum engineer's analytical nature helped maintain some semblance of normal problem-solving activities. James Morrison's military experience proved essential for organizing night watch procedures and defensive preparations as darkness approached, ensuring that the group would maintain security awareness during vulnerable nighttime hours when bear activity might increase. His leadership helped maintain group cohesion under extreme stress. Bear 627's behavioral patterns showed adaptation to the human presence in his territory as he settled into routine patrol activities while maintaining constant awareness of cabin activities through his acute sensory capabilities. The bear's comfort level in the area suggested that normal deterrent methods would be ineffective. At 17:34 hours, Wildlife Officer Daniel Kowalski reported readiness to begin wildlife management operations pending weather clearance for helicopter support, with specialized equipment positioned for bear deterrent or lethal intervention as necessary to enable safe evacuation of the stranded personnel. The psychological challenges of their survival situation intensified as evening approached, with group members displaying various stress responses including withdrawal, hypervigilance, and anxiety-related symptoms that complicated their ability to maintain effective cooperation and decision-making capabilities. The confined cabin space amplified these psychological difficulties. Dr. Chen's evening assessment of Robert Caldwell revealed stable vital signs, but concerning developments in wound appearance that suggested developing infection requiring immediate antibiotic intervention to prevent serious complications. The medical challenges of wilderness care continued to test her emergency medicine training. Kelly Martinez's adaptation to their survival situation enabled her to provide valuable assistance with medical care duties while also contributing to group morale through her natural warmth and determination to overcome the challenges posed by their isolation. The young paramedic's resilience proved greater than initially apparent. The satellite communication system's declining battery capacity forced Thornfield to limit evening communications to essential status updates, while conserving remaining power for potential rescue coordination requirements. The loss of reliable outside contact increased their psychological isolation while reducing access to rescue operation updates. Bear 627's evening activities included continued investigation of the helicopter wreckage and establishment of what appeared to be overnight resting areas near the crash site, suggesting his intention to maintain territorial control throughout the night hours. Wildlife experts warned that nighttime bear activity could present additional challenges. At 18:56 hours, rescue coordinators confirmed improved weather conditions that would enable helicopter operations within the next 2 hours, pending successful completion of wildlife management activities designed to neutralize the threat posed by Bear 627's territorial occupation of the landing zone. The group's evening meal consisted of carefully rationed supplies as Thornfield implemented strict conservation measures designed to stretch their food resources through potential additional days of isolation if rescue attempts were unsuccessful. The hunting guide's wilderness experience proved essential for resource management. Dr. Benjamin Walsh showed continued psychological improvement as he accepted their circumstances and began contributing more effectively to group survival activities, though his lack of wilderness experience continued to limit his practical contributions. The surgeon's mental adaptation illustrated human resilience under extreme stress. Michael Torres's documentation activities provided psychological comfort through the maintenance of routine analytical processes, while creating records that might prove valuable for future wilderness emergency protocols. The petroleum engineer's methodical approach helped maintain some sense of control. James Morrison organized the group's nighttime security procedures, including watch schedules and response protocols for potential bear encounters, ensuring that they would maintain defensive readiness throughout the vulnerable hours of darkness when predator activity typically increased. The psychological dynamics within the cabin reflected the accumulated stress of extended survival challenges, with personality conflicts and coping mechanism differences creating tension that required careful management to maintain group cohesion. The confined space intensified these interpersonal difficulties. At 19:23 hours, Wildlife Officer Daniel Kowalski received clearance to begin wildlife management operations with helicopter support, initiating the most dangerous phase of the rescue operation as specialized teams attempted to neutralize Bear 627's territorial control over the landing zone. Bear 627's response to the approaching aircraft demonstrated the same aggressive territorial behavior that had resulted in the destruction of the medical helicopter. But this time, rescue teams were prepared with wildlife management expertise and specialized equipment designed specifically for dealing with dangerous predator situations. The final phase of their survival ordeal began as rescue helicopters approached the crash site, carrying the specialized personnel and equipment necessary to safely evacuate the stranded medical team and hunting party, despite the continued presence of an aggressive 900-pound Kodiak bear defending his claimed territory. The psychological relief experienced by group members as rescue aircraft approached was tempered by awareness that the most dangerous phase of their ordeal was just beginning, as any miscalculation in dealing with Bear 627 could result in additional casualties and further complications to their already desperate situation. Dr. Chen prepared Robert Caldwell for emergency evacuation while monitoring his condition for any changes that might complicate transport procedures, knowing that this would likely be their only opportunity for successful rescue before their limited medical supplies were completely exhausted. The culmination of their survival experience would test every aspect of their preparation, teamwork, and determination as specialized rescue teams attempted to overcome the unprecedented challenge posed by a massive predator that had successfully defended his territory against modern aviation technology. The next stories. When the Wild Calls. The morning mist clung to the peaks of Glacier National Park like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their hold on the ancient stone faces that had stood sentinel for millennia. Amanda Foster adjusted her veil for the 100th time, the delicate Belgian lace catching on the rough bark of a lodgepole pine, as photographer Marcus Chen positioned her against the wilderness backdrop she had dreamed of since childhood. "This is it, Amanda," Marcus called out, his Canon EOS R5 clicking rapidly in burst mode. "The light is absolutely perfect right now. The way it's hitting your dress against these mountains, it's like something out of a fairy tale." Amanda's fiancé, Dr. James Whitmore, stood 20 feet away with the rest of the wedding party, watching his bride-to-be pose among the towering evergreens and granite peaks of the crown of the continent. His surgical hands, so steady in the operating room back in Seattle, trembled slightly as he held his own camera, documenting what was supposed to be the most magical day of their lives. The wedding party consisted of 12 people total, not including Marcus and his assistant, Sarah Kim. Amanda's maid of honor, Jessica Malone, her college roommate and fellow veterinarian, stood with arms crossed, periodically checking her watch. She had voiced concerns about shooting in such a remote location during late fall, when bears were actively preparing for hibernation and at their most aggressive. "Jess, stop worrying," Amanda had said during the planning phase 6 months earlier. "I've been coming to Glacier since I was a kid. My family has a cabin near Whitefish. I know these mountains better than my own backyard." But Jessica's unease wasn't unfounded. She had spent her residency at a wildlife rehabilitation center in Alaska and had seen firsthand what grizzly bears were capable of when protecting territory or seeking the caloric intake necessary for winter survival. The Apgar Mountains region where they were shooting was known grizzly habitat, and despite the park's assurances that bear activity had been minimal in recent weeks, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were venturing too deep into the wilderness for what was essentially a fashion shoot. The location had been Amanda's idea entirely. She had discovered Hidden Creek Falls during a hiking trip with her father when she was 16, and the secluded waterfall with its pristine pool and dramatic mountain backdrop had become her personal sanctuary. When James proposed to her there 2 years ago, she knew immediately where she wanted their wedding photos taken. "It's where our story really began," she had told Marcus during their initial consultation. "Not where we met, but where we both realized we wanted to spend our lives together." The trek to Hidden Creek Falls required a 3-mile hike from the nearest parking area at Apgar Village, following a moderately difficult trail that wound through dense forest and across several creek beds. Park rangers had required them to obtain a special permit for the commercial photography, and they had been briefed on bear safety protocols, including carrying bear spray and making noise while hiking. Marcus had initially suggested bringing a park guide, but Amanda had insisted she knew the area well enough to lead the group safely. She had hiked these trails dozens of times over the past 15 years, and the added expense of a guide seemed unnecessary for such a familiar location. The morning had started early, with the entire party meeting at 6 a.m. at the Apgar Visitor Center. The October air was crisp, with temperatures hovering around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and patches of snow were visible on the higher peaks. The forecast called for clear skies through early afternoon, with potential weather moving in later in the day. Marcus had packed his equipment carefully, bringing multiple camera bodies, lenses, and portable lighting equipment to capture the variety of shots Amanda had requested. His assistant Sarah carried backup equipment and reflectors, while also serving as a second photographer to capture behind-the-scenes footage for the couple's documentary-style wedding video. The hiking party included Amanda and James, Jessica and her boyfriend Michael Torres, James's best man Doctor, Robert Chen, no relation to Marcus, and his wife Linda, Amanda's sister Catherine Foster Williams and her husband David, Amanda's parents Robert and Margaret Foster, and James's parents Dr. Elizabeth Whitmore and retired Judge Harold Whitmore. The group had made good time on the initial portion of the hike, following the well-maintained Apgar Nature Trail, before branching off onto the more challenging Hidden Creek Trail. Amanda set a comfortable pace, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about her previous visits to the area. "See that dead tree with the unusual bend?" she said, pointing to a lightning-struck ponderosa pine about 50 yards off the trail. "Dad and I called that the question mark tree when I was little. It meant we were halfway to the falls. The trail became progressively steeper as they gained elevation, winding through dense stands of western hemlock, Douglas fir, and western red cedar. The understory was thick with huckleberry bushes, devil's club, and ferns, creating a lush green tunnel that filtered the morning sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. It was Dr. Robert Chen who first noticed the scratches on a large cedar tree about 30 minutes into the hike. As an emergency room physician with a passion for wilderness medicine, He had taken several courses in wildlife tracking and immediately recognized the distinctive claw marks as being from a large bear. "Amanda!" he called out, causing the group to stop. "Come, take a look at this." Amanda examined the tree, running her fingers along the deep gouges in the bark that extended from about 4 feet to nearly 8 feet above the ground. The scratches were relatively fresh, with sap still oozing from some of the deeper marks. "Grizzly," she said without hesitation, "but these could be weeks old. Bears mark trees all the time, especially during salmon runs or when establishing territory." Jessica approached and studied the markings more carefully. "These look pretty fresh to me, Amanda. Look at the color of the wood. It's still light, not weathered, and there's fresh sap." "Bears have been active lately," Margaret Foster added, pulling out her phone to show a local news article she had bookmarked. "There was an incident near Lake McDonald just last week. A hiker had her backpack taken by a grizzly that was apparently following her for over a mile." Marcus looked up from his equipment check, suddenly concerned. "Should we be worried? I mean, we're going to be stationary for several hours during the shoot." Amanda waved off their concerns with the confidence born of a lifetime of mountain experience. "We'll make noise, keep our food properly stored, and we all have bear spray. The chances of actually encountering a bear are incredibly slim. I've hiked thousands of miles in grizzly country and never had a close encounter." What Amanda didn't know, and couldn't have known, was that a massive male grizzly bear, later determined by wildlife officials to weigh approximately 650 pounds, had been using the Hidden Creek Falls area as a primary feeding location for the past 2 weeks. The bear, eventually tagged as Bear number 401 by Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, had discovered a late-season salmon run in the creek that fed the falls and had been aggressively defending the area from other wildlife. The salmon run was unusual for the location and time of year, likely driven by warmer than normal October temperatures and recent heavy rains that had raised water levels throughout the park. For bear number 401, who had failed to gain sufficient weight during the summer due to drought conditions that limited his typical food sources, the salmon represented a critical opportunity to build fat reserves before hibernation. Wildlife biologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell would later determine through GPS collar data that bear number 401 had been present in the immediate area of Hidden Creek Falls for 13 of the previous 14 days, establishing a routine of feeding during early morning and late afternoon hours. The bear had become increasingly aggressive toward any intrusion into what he now considered his territory, as evidenced by several sets of tracks and scat samples that indicated he had chased off at least 3 black bears and a wolf pack in recent days. The wedding party continued their hike, following the narrow trail as it switchbacked up the mountainside. The forest grew denser as they gained elevation, with massive old-growth trees creating a cathedral-like atmosphere. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they approached their destination, and Amanda's excitement was palpable. "Just around this next bend," she called back to the group, her voice barely audible over the roar of the falls. "You're going to love this place." Hidden Creek Falls was everything Amanda had promised, and more. The waterfall dropped nearly 60 feet down a series of granite ledges into a crystal-clear pool surrounded by moss-covered boulders and ancient trees. The scene was breathtakingly beautiful, with the morning sun creating rainbows in the mist and the autumn foliage providing a spectacular backdrop of gold, red, and orange. Marcus immediately began setting up his equipment, his artistic eye already composing shots. "This is incredible, Amanda. I can see why you wanted to shoot here. The natural lighting is absolutely perfect." The group spent the next hour exploring the area while Marcus and Sarah prepared their equipment. Amanda and James walked hand in hand around the pool, reminiscing about his proposal and pointing out changes since their last visit. The falls seemed more robust than usual, likely due to recent precipitation, and the pool was deeper and clearer than Amanda remembered. Jessica, still uneasy about the bear sign they had encountered, used the time to conduct a thorough survey of the immediate area. She found additional evidence of recent bear activity, including several sets of tracks in the soft mud near the water's edge, and what appeared to be fish bones scattered near a large boulder about 50 yards downstream. "Amanda," she said, approaching her friend with obvious concern, "I think we need to seriously consider moving to a different location. There's a lot of bear sign here, and it's all very fresh." Amanda looked at the evidence Jessica had found, and for the first time a flicker of doubt crossed her face. The tracks were indeed large and well-defined, clearly made within the past day or two. But after all the planning, the permit fees, and the logistics of getting 12 people plus equipment to this remote location, the thought of turning back was almost unbearable. "Let's just be extra careful," she said finally. "We'll keep the shoot short, maybe 2 hours instead of the 4 we planned. And we'll post someone as a lookout while we're shooting." Marcus had finished setting up his primary camera position and was ready to begin. He positioned Amanda on a moss-covered boulder at the edge of the pool, with the falls creating a dramatic backdrop behind her. The morning light was absolutely perfect, creating a soft, ethereal glow that made her dress seem to shimmer against the wilderness setting. "This is magical," Marcus said, clicking away as Amanda moved through a series of poses. "The way the light is catching the lace detail on your dress, it's like you're some kind of forest spirit." The rest of the wedding party watched from a safe distance, giving Marcus room to work while staying close enough to communicate. James had taken over the role of impromptu lookout, periodically scanning the surrounding forest for any signs of wildlife. The dense understory limited visibility to about 30 yards in most directions, but the area immediately around the falls was relatively open. What none of them knew was that bear number 401 had been watching them since they first entered his territory. The massive grizzly had been feeding on salmon in the creek about 200 yards upstream when the sound of human voices first reached his ears. Initially, he had simply moved away from the sound, following a game trail that paralleled the creek toward the falls. But as the humans settled into his primary feeding area and showed no signs of leaving, his behavior began to change. Bear number 401 was not a typical grizzly. At 23 years old, he was well past his prime and had been displaying increasingly aggressive behavior over the past 2 seasons. Wildlife officials had received several reports of close encounters with a large male grizzly in the area, including an incident where the bear had approached a group of hikers and refused to leave despite noise-making and bear spray deployment. The bear's collar data, which would be analyzed weeks later, showed that he had circled the wedding party's location for nearly an hour, moving through the dense forest in a pattern that suggested he was assessing the situation rather than simply avoiding human contact. This type of deliberate surveillance behavior was highly unusual and indicated a bear that had lost much of his natural fear of humans. Dr. Mitchell's post-incident analysis would reveal that bear number 401 had likely been conditioned to associate humans with food sources, possibly due to improperly stored garbage or food at nearby campsites. Combined with his advanced age and the stress of needing to gain weight quickly before hibernation, this conditioning had created a dangerous situation that park officials had been completely unaware of. The first hour of the photo shoot proceeded without incident. Marcus captured a series of stunning portraits of Amanda against the waterfall backdrop, then moved on to couple shots with James. The poses were classic and romantic, Amanda and James dancing on the smooth granite beside the pool, sharing a kiss in the mist of the falls, walking hand in hand along the water's edge. "These are absolutely beautiful," Sarah said, reviewing the digital images on the back of Marcus's camera. "The natural lighting here is better than anything we could have created in a studio." Jessica had positioned herself about 40 yards away from the main group, near the trail they had used to access the falls. Her veterinary training had taught her to trust her instincts about animal behavior, and despite the beautiful setting and joyful atmosphere, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was during the transition to family group photos that Jessica first caught a glimpse of movement in the forest. At first, she thought it might be a deer or elk, common in the area and generally harmless. But the size and color of what she had seen made her blood run cold. "Amanda," she called out, trying to keep her voice calm but urgent. "I think we need to pack up. Now." Amanda looked up from adjusting her dress, annoyed at the interruption. "Jess, we just got started. The lighting is perfect right now. I saw something big moving in the trees." Brown, really big. The entire group stopped what they were doing and turned toward Jessica. Marcus lowered his camera, and James moved instinctively closer to Amanda. "Where?" James asked, his medical training kicking in as he began assessing the situation. Jessica pointed toward a dense thicket of devil's club and huckleberry bushes about 60 yards from their position. "Over there, moving parallel to the creek." It was only for a second, but I'm pretty sure it was a bear. Dr. Robert Chen immediately took charge, his emergency room experience providing the leadership the group needed. "Everyone stay calm and move slowly toward the trail. Do not run. Keep talking in normal voices and make yourselves appear large." Marcus began quickly packing his equipment, while Sarah gathered the reflectors and backup gear. The family members started moving away from the water's edge toward the relative safety of the forest trail, following Dr. Chen's instructions to stay together and avoid sudden movements. It was then that bear number 401 made his presence known. The massive grizzly emerged from the forest with the deliberate confidence of an apex predator that feared nothing in his domain. He was enormous, his thick autumn coat making him appear even larger than his already impressive size. His head was broad and dished, with small eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the human gathering with calculating intelligence. The bear's emergence was not sudden or aggressive. It was methodical, almost casual, as if he were simply investigating the intrusion into his territory. He stood at the edge of the clearing for several long moments, his massive head swaying slightly as he tested the air for scents and assessed the situation. "Nobody move, Doctor," Chen whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of the falls. "Don't make eye contact. Just back away very slowly." Bear number 401 took several steps toward the group, his massive paws making no sound on the soft forest floor despite his enormous weight. He was now approximately 50 yards away from Amanda, who had frozen in place near the edge of the pool, her white dress making her the most visible member of the group. Marcus, against all professional judgment and safety protocols, raised his camera and began photographing the bear. The click of the shutter seemed incredibly loud in the tense silence, and the bear's ears immediately swiveled toward the sound. "Put the camera down," Jessica hissed. But Marcus was in full photographer mode, capturing what he knew would be once-in-a-lifetime images. The bear's behavior changed at the sound of the camera. His head lifted, and he began moving more deliberately toward the group. What had started as curiosity was evolving into something more focused and potentially dangerous. Amanda began backing away from the water's edge, moving slowly toward where James stood with the rest of the group. Her elaborate dress made movement difficult, and the train caught on rocks and vegetation as she tried to navigate the uneven terrain. "Amanda, just leave the dress," Margaret Foster called out to her daughter. "Just get away from there." But Amanda had spent nearly 2 years planning this wedding, and the dress alone had cost $8,000. The idea of abandoning it to the wilderness seemed unthinkable, even in the face of danger. Bear number 401 continued his approach, now less than 30 yards from Amanda's position. His massive size became more apparent with each step. He stood nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder while on all fours, and his head was enormous, easily the size of a large television. Dr. Chen reached for the bear spray on his belt, an industrial-strength canister that was supposed to be effective against aggressive bears at distances up to 30 feet. But as he fumbled with the safety mechanism, the bear's behavior shifted dramatically. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment, bear number 401 was moving with the measured gait of a curious animal. The next, he was charging with the explosive speed that made grizzly bears one of the most dangerous predators in North America. Later analysis would suggest that the bear's charge was triggered by Amanda's sudden movement as she stumbled over her dress train. In the bear's perception, her fall might have appeared to be aggressive behavior or an attempt to flee, both of which could trigger a predatory response in a bear that was already stressed and territorial. The speed of a charging grizzly bear is difficult to comprehend for anyone who has never witnessed it firsthand. Despite weighing over 600 pounds, bear number 401 covered the 30 yards to Amanda's position in less than 3 seconds, moving with the fluid grace of a much smaller animal. Amanda's scream pierced the mountain air as she realized the bear was charging directly at her. She tried to run, but her dress made any kind of rapid movement nearly impossible. The elaborate train, designed to flow gracefully behind her as she walked down the aisle, became a deadly hindrance that caught on every rock and branch. James started running toward Amanda, his own safety forgotten in his desperation to reach his bride, but the distance between them was too great, and the bear's speed was too overwhelming. Bear number 401 reached Amanda just as she stumbled again near the edge of the pool. The bear's initial contact was not a full attack, but rather an investigative swipe that knocked her off her feet and sent her sprawling onto the granite ledge. The force of the impact was tremendous, and Amanda's head struck the rock with a sickening crack that was audible even over the roar of the waterfall. The bear stood over Amanda's motionless form, his massive head lowering to investigate this strange creature that smelled of perfume and fear. For a moment, the scene was frozen in tableau. The enormous predator and the helpless woman in her wedding dress, surrounded by the pristine beauty of the wilderness that had suddenly become a nightmare. It was Jessica who broke the spell, shouting at the top of her lungs and waving her arms in an attempt to distract the bear from Amanda. Her veterinary training had taught her that bears often lost interest in prey that stopped moving, and her hope was that the bear might leave Amanda alone if presented with a more active target. The strategy worked, but with terrifying consequences. Bear number 401 lifted his massive head and fixed his small, dark eyes on Jessica. For several seconds, he seemed to weigh his options, his attention split between the motionless figure at his feet and the shouting woman 40 yards away. James had reached Amanda's position and was trying to pull her away from the bear, but her dress was caught beneath the animal's massive paw. As James tugged desperately at his bride's unconscious form, bear number 401's attention returned to the immediate threat. The bear's second attack was swift and decisive. He reared up on his hind legs, towering nearly 9 feet tall, before dropping down and striking James with a powerful swipe of his front paw. The blow caught James across the chest and shoulder, sending him flying backward into the pool with tremendous force. Dr. Chen finally managed to deploy his bear spray, but the wind direction was wrong, and much of the concentrated pepper spray blew back toward the human group. The small amount that reached the bear seemed to have minimal effect, possibly due to the animal's size and the adrenaline coursing through his system. Marcus, still photographing despite the chaos unfolding before him, captured the moment when bear number 401 grasped Amanda's dress in his massive jaws and began dragging her away from the water's edge. The images, which would later become evidence in the investigation, showed the terrible disparity in size between the massive predator and his helpless victim. Amanda regained consciousness as the bear dragged her across the rocky ground, her agonized screams echoing off the canyon walls. The beautiful lace dress that had taken months to design and fit was being shredded by rocks and the bear's claws, leaving a trail of white silk and drops of blood on the granite ledge. "Help me!" Amanda screamed, her voice raw with terror and pain. "Somebody help me!" James had managed to pull himself from the pool, blood streaming from deep gashes across his chest. Despite his injuries, he immediately began following the bear, shouting and throwing rocks in a desperate attempt to force the animal to release his bride. The other members of the wedding party were paralyzed by the horror of what they were witnessing. Several of the women were screaming, while the men seemed frozen between the desire to help and the rational knowledge that they would likely only become additional victims. Bear number 401 dragged Amanda approximately 50 yards from the pool before stopping near a large fallen log. The bear's behavior suggested he was seeking a more secluded location where he could feed without interruption, a pattern consistent with grizzly bears that had killed large prey. It was at this point that Amanda's survival instincts kicked in with remarkable clarity. Despite her injuries and terror, she remembered the bear safety training she had received years earlier during a wilderness first aid course. She forced herself to stop struggling and went completely limp, hoping the bear would lose interest if she appeared to be dead. The strategy initially seemed to work. Bear number 401 released his grip on her dress and began sniffing around her motionless form, his massive nose investigating this strange creature that smelled unlike any prey he had encountered before. The bear's investigation was methodical and terrifying, his hot breath and the rough texture of his tongue clearly audible to the wedding party members who were watching from a distance. Jessica had managed to reach James and was trying to assess his injuries while keeping one eye on the bear. As a veterinarian, she understood animal behavior better than anyone else in the group, and what she was seeing filled her with dread. "He's not going to leave," she whispered to James, who was struggling to stay conscious despite significant blood loss. "This isn't curiosity anymore." He sees her as food. The realization that the bear intended to kill and consume Amanda galvanized the group into action. Dr. Chen began coordinating a rescue attempt, while Margaret Foster used her satellite communicator to contact park rangers and emergency services. "Mayday! Mayday!" Margaret spoke into the device, her voice shaking with panic. "We have a grizzly bear attack at Hidden Creek Falls. The bear has taken my daughter. We need immediate help." The emergency dispatcher, Rebecca Martinez, had been working for Glacier National Park's emergency response team for 8 years and had handled dozens of bear encounters. But the desperation in Margaret's voice immediately told her this was something far more serious than a typical close call. "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm and give me exact details," Rebecca said, her training taking over. "How many people are injured? And what is the current status of the bear?" "The bear dragged my daughter away from our group. She's still alive, but he has her pinned down about 50 yards from where we're standing. My son-in-law is badly injured. We need rangers and medical help immediately." Rebecca immediately initiated the park's emergency response protocol, dispatching 2 ranger teams and requesting helicopter support from the Montana National Guard. She also contacted Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the park's wildlife biologist, to provide expert guidance on dealing with a grizzly bear that had taken a human victim. Back at Hidden Creek Falls, the wedding party was attempting a coordinated effort to drive the bear away from Amanda. Following Dr. Chen's instructions, they had formed a line and were advancing slowly toward the bear's position while making as much noise as possible. "Make yourselves big!" Dr. Chen shouted. "Wave your arms and keep yelling!" The group moved forward like a human wall, shouting and clapping their hands while trying to appear as threatening as possible to the massive predator. For several tense moments, Bear number 401 seemed uncertain about how to respond to this coordinated human behavior. The bear lifted his head from where Amanda lay motionless and stared at the approaching group with what appeared to be calculated assessment. His ears were forward and alert, but he showed no signs of backing down from what he clearly considered to be his territory and his prey. It was then that Marcus made a decision that may have saved Amanda's life, though it nearly cost him his own. Breaking away from the group, he sprinted toward the bear while shouting at the top of his lungs and waving his camera bag above his head. The sudden movement and noise broke the bear's concentration, and bear number 401 lifted himself into a defensive posture, standing nearly 9 feet tall as he assessed this new, more immediate threat. For several seconds, Marcus and the bear faced each other across 10 yards of rocky ground, the photographer's courage incredible in the face of certain death if the animal chose to attack. "Get Amanda!" Marcus screamed to the rest of the group. "Now, while he's focused on me!" James, despite his serious injuries, immediately broke from the human line and ran toward where Amanda lay beneath the fallen log. Jessica followed close behind, her veterinary bag in hand, while the rest of the group continued their advance toward the bear. Bear number 401 seemed confused by the multiple stimuli, the shouting group, the solitary man waving objects above his head, and the movement toward his prey. For critical seconds, the animal appeared frozen by indecision, unsure which threat to address first. James reached Amanda and immediately began pulling her away from the log, not taking time to assess her injuries. Amanda was conscious but clearly in shock, her beautiful wedding dress now stained with blood and torn to shreds by rocks and bear claws. "Can you move?" James asked urgently, trying to lift Amanda to her feet while watching the bear over his shoulder. "I think so," Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible. "My leg. Something's wrong with my leg." Jessica quickly examined Amanda's injuries as they attempted to move her to safety. There were deep puncture wounds on her shoulder and back where the bear's teeth had gripped her dress and flesh, and her left leg appeared to be severely injured, possibly broken. "We need to get her out of here right now," Jessica said, helping to support Amanda's weight as they began moving toward the rest of the group. Bear number 401's attention returned to the fleeing humans, and his predatory instincts reasserted themselves. The bear dropped to all fours and began moving toward James and Amanda with renewed purpose, his massive bulk covering ground with frightening speed. It was Dr. Chen who ultimately saved them, deploying a second canister of bear spray with perfect timing and wind direction. The concentrated pepper spray caught bear number 401 directly in the face and eyes, causing the animal to rear back and shake his massive head in obvious distress. The bear's reaction to the pepper spray was immediate and dramatic. He began rubbing his face against trees and rolling on the ground in an attempt to relieve the burning sensation. For the first time since the encounter began, bear number 401 appeared vulnerable and disoriented. "Move! Move! Move!" Dr. Chen shouted, and the entire wedding party began a controlled retreat toward the trail they had used to access the falls. Marcus backed away slowly from the distressed bear, keeping his camera equipment ready in case the animal recovered and renewed his attack. The bear spray had bought them precious time, but everyone knew the effects would be temporary. The retreat down the Hidden Creek Trail was a nightmare of logistics and terror. Amanda was barely conscious and unable to walk under her own power, requiring James and Dr. Chen to essentially carry her down the steep, rocky path. Jessica led the way, using her knowledge of wilderness medicine to identify the safest route while watching for signs that the bear might be following. Behind them, Marcus and Sarah documented their escape while serving as rear guard, watching for any sign that bear number 401 had recovered from the pepper spray and resumed his pursuit. The bear's roars of pain and frustration echoed through the forest, a terrifying reminder of how close they had all come to becoming victims. "Is he following us?" Margaret Foster asked, her voice shaking as she helped her injured daughter navigate the treacherous trail. "I don't think so," Marcus replied, but his camera was ready and his eyes never stopped scanning the forest behind them. The bear spray really got him good, but we need to keep moving. The 3-mile hike back to Apgar village, which had taken the group 90 minutes that morning, was covered in just over an hour during their desperate retreat. Amanda drifted in and out of consciousness during the descent, but she remained alert enough to walk with assistance and provide reassurance that she was not bleeding internally. Park Ranger Tom Bradley met them at the trailhead with a full medical team and several other rangers who immediately secured the area and began assessing the situation. Amanda was loaded into a waiting ambulance for transport to Kalispell Regional Medical Center, while James received initial treatment for his chest wounds at the scene. "Can you tell me exactly what happened up there?" Ranger Bradley asked Dr. Chen as paramedics worked on Amanda and James. Dr. Chen provided a detailed account of the bear encounter while Marcus uploaded his photographs to his camera's Wi-Fi system, sending the images directly to park officials and wildlife authorities. The photos provided crucial evidence about the bear's size, behavior, and the sequence of events during the attack. "This is bear number 401, Dr. Mitchell said, reviewing the photographs on her tablet. "We've been tracking him for 2 years. He's been displaying increasingly aggressive behavior, but nothing like this." Dr. Mitchell immediately ordered a closure of the entire Hidden Creek area and began coordinating with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks to locate and assess bear number 401. The bear's behavior during the attack was highly unusual and suggested either injury, illness, or a dangerous level of food conditioning that made him a significant threat to future park visitors. At Kalispell Regional Medical Center, Amanda underwent emergency surgery to repair damage to her shoulder and left leg. The puncture wounds from the bear's teeth had narrowly missed major arteries and organs, but she required extensive reconstructive surgery and would face months of physical therapy. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the trauma surgeon who operated on Amanda, described her injuries as remarkably survivable given the circumstances of the attack. "Bear attacks of this nature usually result in much more severe trauma or death," she explained to the gathered family members. Amanda was extraordinarily lucky. James received treatment for 3 broken ribs and deep lacerations across his chest and shoulder, injuries that occurred when the bear struck him during his attempt to rescue Amanda. Despite his injuries, he refused pain medication until he knew Amanda was stable and out of immediate danger. The story of the grizzly bear attack during the wedding photo shoot spread rapidly through social media and news outlets, with Marcus's dramatic photographs providing compelling visual evidence of the encounter. The images showed bear number 401 in his full, terrifying majesty, as well as the moment he dragged Amanda away from the waterfall. Wildlife officials spent 3 days tracking bear number 401 through the Hidden Creek area before locating him approximately 2 miles from the attack site. The bear was tranquilized and transported to a facility where veterinarians could conduct a comprehensive health assessment to determine what had caused his aggressive behavior. Dr. Mitchell's examination revealed that bear number 401 was suffering from a severe dental infection that had likely been causing him significant pain for several weeks. The infection had made normal feeding difficult and may have contributed to his desperate attempt to secure the salmon run at Hidden Creek Falls and his aggressive response to human intrusion. Pain can make any animal unpredictable and dangerous, Doctor, Mitchell explained during a press conference. Combined with his advanced age and the stress of needing to gain weight before hibernation, the dental infection created a perfect storm of factors that led to this attack. The decision to euthanize bear number 401 was controversial, but ultimately deemed necessary by park officials. Despite his illness, the bear had demonstrated a willingness to attack humans and drag a victim away from a group, behavior that indicated he could pose a continuing threat to park visitors. Amanda's recovery was long and difficult, both physically and psychologically. The puncture wounds healed relatively quickly, but the damage to her leg required multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. More challenging was the psychological trauma of the attack, which resulted in severe PTSD and a complete inability to be in wilderness settings. "I used to love the mountains," Amanda said during an interview 6 months after the attack. "They were my sanctuary, my place of peace. Now I can't even look at photographs of forests without having panic attacks." The wedding that was supposed to take place the day after the photo shoot was postponed indefinitely while Amanda recovered. When she and James finally did marry, it was in a small ceremony at a Seattle hotel, with security guards and no outdoor elements that might trigger Amanda's trauma response. Marcus's photographs of the bear attack won several journalism awards and were featured in National Geographic and other major publications. However, he struggled with guilt over his decision to continue photographing during the initial stages of the encounter rather than immediately helping with the evacuation. "I was in photographer mode," he said during a therapy session months later. "I saw this incredible, terrifying scene unfolding, and my instinct was to document it. I sometimes wonder if Amanda would have been hurt less severely if I had dropped my camera and helped get her away from the water faster." The Hidden Creek Falls area remained closed to the public for the remainder of the 2025 season, while park officials reassessed safety protocols and implemented new requirements for backcountry photography permits. The incident led to significant changes in how commercial photography was regulated in national parks, with mandatory guide requirements and enhanced safety training for all participants. Jessica left veterinary practice 6 months after the attack and became a wilderness safety instructor, dedicating her career to teaching others how to recognize and respond to dangerous wildlife encounters. Her experience during the bear attack, particularly her ability to read animal behavior and coordinate the rescue effort, made her a sought-after expert in backcountry safety. "People think bears are predictable," she said during one of her safety courses. "They think if you follow the rules, make noise, carry bear spray, avoid surprising them, you'll be safe. But the truth is, bears are individuals with their own personalities, health issues, and stress factors. Sometimes, despite doing everything right, you can still find yourself in a life-threatening situation." The investigation into the attack revealed several factors that had contributed to the incident beyond bear number 401's dental infection. Unusually warm October temperatures had extended the salmon run later into the season than normal, creating an unexpected food source that the bear was defending. Additionally, drought conditions earlier in the year had limited the bear's access to his normal food sources, increasing his desperation to secure calories before hibernation. Park officials also discovered that there had been several unreported sightings of a large grizzly bear in the Hidden Creek area during the weeks leading up to the attack. Day hikers and backpackers had encountered the bear on multiple occasions, but had failed to report the sightings to rangers, believing them to be normal wildlife activity. "If we had known about the pattern of bear activity in that area, we would have closed the trail or at least issued warnings," Ranger Bradley said during the official investigation. "The public has a responsibility to report wildlife encounters, especially with potentially dangerous animals." Dr. Walsh, Amanda's trauma surgeon, used the case to advocate for improved emergency response capabilities in remote areas of national parks. The 3-hour delay between the attack and Amanda's arrival at the hospital could have been fatal if her injuries had been more severe. "We need helicopter landing zones closer to popular backcountry destinations," she argued in a medical journal article about the case. Amanda survived because her injuries, while severe, weren't immediately life-threatening. But if the bear had caused arterial damage or internal bleeding, those 3 hours could have been the difference between life and death. The economic impact of the attack extended far beyond the immediate medical costs and investigation expenses. Tourism to Glacier National Park dropped significantly during the 2026 season as potential visitors expressed concern about bear safety. Local businesses that depended on park tourism experienced substantial revenue losses, and several outfitters that specialized in backcountry photography tours went out of business. Amanda and James filed a lawsuit against the National Park Service, arguing that inadequate warning about bear activity in the Hidden Creek area had contributed to the attack. The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but it established new precedents for government liability in wildlife attacks on public lands. This wasn't just a random act of nature, the couple's attorney argued. Park officials knew, or should have known, that there was an aggressive bear using this area as a feeding site. They had a responsibility to warn the public or close the area to prevent exactly this type of incident. The bear attack at Hidden Creek Falls became a case study in wildlife management programs across North America, illustrating the complex challenges of managing large predators in areas where human recreational use was increasing. The incident highlighted the need for better communication between park officials and the public, as well as improved protocols for assessing and responding to aggressive wildlife behavior. Dr. Mitchell, who had studied bear number 401 for years before the attack, published a comprehensive analysis of the incident that became required reading for wildlife management students. Her report detailed how a combination of environmental factors, health issues, and human behavior had created the conditions for a catastrophic encounter. Bear number 401 was not inherently a dangerous animal, Dr. Mitchell wrote. Under normal circumstances, he would have avoided human contact and posed no threat to park visitors. But the convergence of multiple stressors, pain from his dental infection, hunger from a poor food year, and territorial behavior around a critical late-season feeding site, transformed him into a predator that saw humans as either competitors or prey. The psychological impact of the attack extended beyond Amanda and James to affect all the witnesses and their families. Several members of the wedding party required therapy to process the trauma of watching their loved one being mauled by a wild animal. Margaret Foster, Amanda's mother, developed severe anxiety about outdoor activities and moved from Montana to Arizona to escape the constant reminders of the incident. "You can't unsee something like that," Margaret said during a family therapy session. "The image of that enormous bear dragging my daughter away while she screamed for help, it replays in my mind constantly. I used to love hiking and camping, but now I can't even walk through a city park without looking over my shoulder." Marcus struggled with both guilt and fame following the publication of his bear attack photographs. While the images earned him international recognition and several prestigious awards, he felt conflicted about profiting from documenting Amanda's trauma. "These photos represent the worst day of several people's lives," he said during an ethics panel at a photography conference. "Yes, they serve an important educational purpose about wildlife safety, but they also capture a human being in extreme distress. I continue to question whether I should have put down my camera and focused entirely on helping with the rescue." The incident also sparked debate within the photography community about the ethics of documenting dangerous situations. Several professional organizations developed new guidelines for photographers working in wilderness settings, emphasizing the responsibility to prioritize human safety over getting the shot. Amanda's recovery was marked by both remarkable physical resilience and ongoing psychological challenges. 6 months after the attack, she had regained most of her mobility and strength, but remained unable to tolerate outdoor environments or images of wildlife. The rational part of my mind knows that bear attacks are extremely rare, she said, during a television interview marking the first anniversary of the incident. But the trauma response isn't rational. My body goes into full panic mode if I even see a nature documentary on television. Despite the ongoing challenges, Amanda and James found ways to rebuild their lives and their relationship. They moved to an urban apartment in Seattle, far from the wilderness areas that had once been their favorite destinations. Amanda changed careers from outdoor education to working with trauma survivors, finding purpose in helping others who had experienced life-altering incidents. "I can't go back to the mountains," she said, "but I can use my experience to help other people who are struggling with trauma. There's something powerful about being able to say, 'I understand what you're going through, because I've been there too.'" The Hidden Creek Falls area reopened to the public in 2027 with new safety protocols and infrastructure improvements. A memorial plaque was installed near the trailhead, not to commemorate the attack, but to honor bear number 401 and remind visitors of the complex relationship between humans and wildlife in shared habitats. "We share this landscape with creatures that were here long before us and will hopefully be here long after us," the plaque reads. "Our presence in their domain is a privilege that comes with responsibility to respect their space, understand their needs, and remember that we are visitors in their home." The story of the grizzly bear attack during the wedding photo shoot became part of the oral history of Glacier National Park, passed down through ranger training programs and repeated around campfires as both cautionary tale and reminder of the raw power of nature. For Amanda Foster and her family, it remained a defining moment that divided their lives into before and after. Before the attack, when the wilderness represented adventure and beauty, and after, when it became a source of fear and trauma that would take years to overcome. The mountains of Glacier National Park continued to draw millions of visitors each year, most of whom would never encounter the kind of danger that Amanda and her wedding party faced at Hidden Creek Falls. But for those who knew the story, every hike into bear country carried an added awareness of the delicate balance between human recreation and wildlife preservation, and the terrible consequences when that balance was disrupted. In the end, the attack served as a stark reminder that nature remains fundamentally wild and unpredictable, despite humanity's best efforts to manage and control it. The pristine beauty that drew Amanda to Hidden Creek Falls for her wedding photos was inseparable from the primal danger that nearly cost her life. Two sides of the same wilderness coin that continues to define our complex relationship with the natural world. The next stories. Kodiak Bear, Mauls soldier, during training, August 9th, 2025. The morning air at Fort Wainwright carried the crisp bite of late summer, tinged with the scent of spruce and the distant smoke from controlled burns deeper in the Alaskan wilderness. Private First Class Daniel Moore stood at attention with his unit, the 1st Stryker Brigade Combat Team, 25th Infantry Division, as Sergeant First Class Marcus Rodriguez briefed them on the final phase of their mountain warfare training exercise. The date was August 7th, 2025, 2 days before everything would change forever. Daniel Moore was 23 years old, born and raised in Prescott, Arizona, where the closest thing to a bear was the occasional javelina wandering through suburban backyards. His father, James Moore, had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, with the 82nd Airborne, and Daniel had grown up hearing stories of brotherhood forged in impossible conditions. His mother, Sarah, a trauma nurse at Yavapai Regional Medical Center, had taught him that courage meant helping others even when you were afraid. Daniel carried both lessons with him when he enlisted 18 months ago, drawn by a desire to test himself against something larger than the comfortable predictability of desert suburbia. Standing beside him, Specialist Maria Santos shifted her weight from foot to foot, her dark eyes scanning the tree line beyond the staging area. Maria was 25, a second-generation immigrant whose parents had fled violence in El Salvador to build a new life in Los Angeles. She had joined the army to pay for medical school, planning to follow her dream of becoming a pediatric surgeon. Her younger brother, Carlos, was starting his sophomore year at UCLA, and she sent half her pay home each month to help with his tuition. Maria had grown up in urban environments where danger wore human faces and spoke human languages. The wilderness represented something different entirely, a realm where instinct and preparation mattered more than street smarts. To Daniel's left stood Private First Class Thomas Chen, 22 years old, the son of immigrants from Taiwan, who had built a successful engineering firm in Seattle. Thomas had graduated summa cum laude from the University of Washington with a degree in environmental science, before surprising his family by enlisting. He spoke Mandarin fluently and had spent summers hiking the Cascade Mountains, making him one of the few soldiers in the unit with extensive wilderness experience. His calm demeanor and analytical mind had earned him respect among his peers, and he often served as an informal liaison between the younger soldiers and the NCOS. Sergeant First Class Marcus Rodriguez, 34, commanded respect through a combination of expertise and genuine care for his soldiers. A career soldier from San Antonio, Texas, he had completed 4 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, earning a Purple Heart and 2 Bronze Stars. More importantly to his current mission, he had spent the last 3 years specializing in mountain warfare training, completing advanced courses at the Northern Warfare Training Center. Marcus had learned to read the Alaskan wilderness like a tactical map, understanding that nature could be more dangerous than any human enemy. His wife, Elena, worried constantly about his assignments, especially after their daughter Isabella was born 6 months ago. He carried a photo of them in his left breast pocket, a talisman that reminded him why coming home mattered. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, 31, served as the unit's communications specialist and had been instrumental in planning the exercise. Originally from rural Montana, she had grown up hunting elk and deer with her father, giving her an intuitive understanding of large predators that would prove crucial in the coming days. Jennifer had joined the army at 18 to escape an abusive relationship and had found in military service not just a career, but a family. She was pursuing a bachelor's degree in wildlife biology through online courses, planning to transition to the Forest Service when her enlistment ended. Her expertise with radio equipment and her knowledge of animal behavior made her an invaluable member of the team. The exercise was designed to test the unit's ability to operate in the challenging terrain of interior Alaska, where the military conducted regular training to prepare for potential Arctic operations. The soldiers would spend 5 days navigating through the wilderness surrounding Fort Wainwright, practicing small unit tactics, survival skills, and emergency procedures. The route would take them through dense boreal forest, across streams swollen with recent rain, and up rocky ridgelines that offered stunning views of the Alaska Range. The specific area chosen for the exercise lay approximately 47 miles northeast of Fairbanks, in a region known to wildlife biologists as prime habitat for both black bears and the occasional brown bear that wandered north from the Alaska Peninsula. Fort Wainwright's range control had coordinated with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to ensure the training area was clear of known bear denning sites, but the protocol acknowledged that bear encounters remained a possibility in any Alaskan wilderness operation. Captain Michael Harrison, the company commander, was a 38-year-old West Point graduate who had commanded troops in multiple theaters. He understood the balance between realistic training and acceptable risk, and he had personally reviewed the route planning and safety protocols. The exercise would include 2 resupply points where helicopters would deliver food and water, minimizing the need for soldiers to carry excessive weight while still providing genuine training value. Emergency extraction points had been identified at 6-mile intervals along the route, with GPS coordinates provided to all team leaders. The weather forecast for the training period looked favorable, with daytime temperatures in the mid-60s and nighttime lows in the 40s. However, afternoon thunderstorms were possible, and the soldiers had been briefed on procedures for dealing with lightning strikes and flash flooding. Each soldier carried a military-grade GPS device, emergency beacon, and survival kit that included bear spray, signal flares, and emergency rations for 72 hours. As Sergeant Rodriguez concluded his briefing, Daniel felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that preceded any challenging training exercise. He had performed well in previous field exercises, earning praise from his squad leaders for his attention to detail and willingness to help struggling teammates. However, this would be his first extended operation in true wilderness conditions, far from the safety net of nearby roads and civilian emergency services that characterize training areas in the lower 48. The unit's medic, Specialist Lisa Park, was a 26-year-old former EMT from Portland, Oregon, who had joined the Army to gain experience for her goal of becoming a physician assistant. She carried an enhanced medical kit that included supplies for treating traumatic injuries, hypothermia, and other wilderness emergencies. Lisa had completed additional training in wilderness medicine and understood that in the remote areas where they would be operating, her skills might mean the difference between life and death for injured soldiers. Private Second Class Kevin Murphy, 19, was the youngest member of the unit and often served as the target of good-natured ribbing from his more experienced teammates. A high school wrestler from rural Ohio, Kevin possessed natural athletic ability and an eagerness to prove himself that sometimes led to poor decisions. His squad leader had specifically instructed him to focus on following orders rather than trying to impress anyone, advice that Kevin accepted with the enthusiasm of youth and the impatience that often accompanies it. The team's automatic weapons specialist, Specialist James Wright, was a 27-year-old former factory worker from Detroit who had enlisted after losing his job in the automotive industry. James carried an M249 squad automatic weapon, a 20-pound machine gun that would become significantly heavier during long movements through difficult terrain. He had developed a methodical approach to equipment maintenance and land navigation that made him a steady, reliable presence during training exercises. His girlfriend, Michelle, was studying nursing in Michigan and planning to join him in Alaska after graduation. Corporal David Kim served as one of the team's fire team leaders, a 24-year-old from Orange County, California, who had been promoted ahead of his peers due to his leadership potential and tactical acumen. David had completed Ranger School the previous year, a grueling 61-day course that tested small unit leadership under extreme stress. The experience had given him confidence in his ability to make life-or-death decisions, but it had also taught him to respect the unpredictable nature of combat and survival situations. The final member of the unit was Private First Class Robert Johnson, a 21-year-old from rural Georgia who had grown up hunting in the pine forests and swamps of the South. Robert understood firearms and basic fieldcraft, but the scale and wildness of Alaska intimidated him in ways he was reluctant to admit. His father had served in Vietnam and had shared stories about the importance of staying alert in unfamiliar terrain, lessons that had taken on new meaning relevance as Robert prepared for his first extended wilderness exercise. As the soldiers conducted final equipment checks and loaded their rucksacks into the transport vehicles, the morning sun climbed higher above the tree line, promising a beautiful day for the beginning of their journey. The staging area buzzed with the controlled energy of professional soldiers preparing for a challenging mission, each individual contributing to a collective sense of purpose and readiness. The route they would follow had been carefully planned to provide diverse training opportunities while minimizing unnecessary risks. Starting from a helicopter landing zone designated LZ Alpha, located on a ridge approximately 12 miles from the nearest road, the unit would move northeast through mixed forest terrain, following game trails and natural corridors whenever possible. The first day's movement would cover approximately 8 miles, ending at a designated bivouac site near a small creek that would provide water for cooking and cleaning. Day 2 would involve a more challenging movement across broken terrain, including a stream crossing that would test the soldiers' ability to maintain equipment security while navigating natural obstacles. The objective was a ridgeline observation post where the unit would conduct surveillance exercises designed to test their ability to gather and report intelligence in a tactical environment. The third day would feature small unit tactics training, with the soldiers practicing patrol movements, ambush techniques, and immediate action drills adapted for wilderness conditions. This phase of the exercise would culminate in a night movement to a final objective, testing the unit's ability to navigate and operate effectively in darkness. Days 4 and 5 would focus on survival skills and emergency procedures, including shelter construction, water purification, and signaling techniques. The exercise would conclude with extraction from LZ Bravo, a clearing located approximately 18 miles from the starting point, demonstrating the unit's ability to complete a complex movement through unfamiliar terrain. Throughout the exercise, the soldiers would operate under tactical conditions, using hand and arm signals to communicate during daylight hours, and maintaining noise discipline to avoid detection by simulated enemy forces. Radio communications would be limited to scheduled check-ins and emergency situations, forcing the soldiers to rely on their training and leadership skills to overcome unexpected challenges. The area they would traverse represented some of Alaska's most pristine wilderness, home to diverse wildlife, including moose, caribou, wolves, lynx, and both species of bears found in North America. Recent wildlife surveys had documented a healthy population of black bears throughout the region, with occasional brown bear sightings reported by hunters and researchers. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game had briefed the military on proper food storage procedures and bear encounter protocols, emphasizing the importance of maintaining situational awareness and following established safety procedures. Fort Wainwright's Wildlife Management Officer, Dr. Elizabeth Carlson, was a retired professor of wildlife biology from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, who had spent 30 years studying predator behavior in Arctic and subarctic environments. She had personally reviewed the exercise plan and had expressed confidence that proper precautions would minimize the likelihood of dangerous wildlife encounters. However, she had also emphasized that operating in bear habitat always carried inherent risks that could not be completely eliminated through planning and preparation. The soldiers had received comprehensive training on bear safety, including proper food storage techniques, group movement procedures, and the use of bear spray as a deterrent. Each squad carried military-grade bear spray with a range of 30 feet and a duration of 9 seconds, sufficient to deter most bears if used correctly. Additionally, selected soldiers carried 12-gauge shotguns loaded with rubber bullets and slugs, providing a non-lethal option for bear encounters that could not be resolved through other means. As the unit prepared to board the helicopters that would transport them to Landing Zone Alpha, Sergeant Rodriguez conducted a final safety briefing, emphasizing the importance of following established procedures and maintaining unit cohesion throughout the exercise. He reminded the soldiers that their primary mission was training, not recreation, and that every decision they made should prioritize safety while accomplishing their assigned objectives. The flight to LZ Alpha took 43 minutes, carrying the soldiers over vast expanses of forest broken by meandering rivers and small lakes that reflected the morning sky like scattered mirrors. From the air, the landscape appeared both beautiful and intimidating, an endless wilderness that could easily swallow a small unit of soldiers without leaving a trace. The helicopter crew chief pointed out various landmarks along the route, including the locations of emergency landing zones and the coordinates for the nearest search and rescue facilities. As the helicopters approached LZ Alpha, Daniel pressed his face to the window and studied the terrain below. The landing zone occupied a natural clearing on a wooded ridge, surrounded by dense forest that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Small clearings and meadows dotted the landscape, connected by what appeared to be game trails that wound through the trees like faint pencil lines on green paper. Scattered throughout the area were small ponds and streams, their surfaces dark and still in the morning calm. The helicopter touched down with a gentle bump, and the soldiers quickly unloaded their equipment and moved away from the aircraft as it prepared to depart. Within minutes, the sound of rotor blades faded into the distance, leaving the unit alone in a silence so complete that it seemed almost oppressive. The only sounds were the whisper of wind through the trees and the distant call of a raven somewhere in the forest below. Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the soldiers for a brief terrain orientation, using his map and compass to identify key features and confirm their location. The GPS coordinates matched their planned insertion point, and the weather remained clear with unlimited visibility. According to their timeline, they had 6 hours of daylight to reach their first objective, a march that would take them through terrain that looked deceptively simple from their elevated position, but would likely prove more challenging at ground level. As the unit prepared to move out, Daniel checked his equipment one final time, ensuring that his weapon was clean and properly lubricated, his water bottles were full, and his emergency gear was easily accessible. The weight of his rucksack felt manageable during the pre-combat inspection, but he knew from experience that every pound would feel heavier as the day progressed and fatigue accumulated. The first phase of movement took them down the ridge through mixed forest, dominated by white spruce and paper birch, with an understory of dwarf birch and various berry bushes that showed signs of recent animal activity. Corporal Kim, serving as point man, moved carefully through the trees, frequently stopping to listen and observe before signaling the unit to continue. The forest floor was carpeted with fallen leaves and moss that muffled their footsteps, but also concealed deadfall and other obstacles that could cause injuries or equipment damage. After 2 hours of movement, the unit reached a small clearing where Sergeant Rodriguez called a halt for rest and equipment checks. The soldiers were performing well, maintaining proper spacing and noise discipline while adapting to the challenging terrain. However, Specialist Santos had noticed something that troubled her. Frequent signs of bear activity, including claw marks on trees, overturned logs, and what appeared to be relatively fresh scat along their route of march. Staff Sergeant Walsh, with her background in wildlife biology, examined the sign more closely and confirmed Santos's assessment. The evidence suggested the presence of at least one large bear in the immediate area, though the age of the sign made it difficult to determine whether the animal was still in the vicinity. Following established protocols, she reported their observations to Sergeant Rodriguez, who made the decision to alter their route slightly to avoid areas with the heaviest concentration of bear sign. The route modification would add approximately 30 minutes to their movement time, but would take them through terrain that showed less evidence of recent bear activity. As the unit prepared to resume movement, Rodriguez reminded them of proper procedures for bear encounters, emphasizing the importance of maintaining group cohesion and following his instructions without question if they encountered wildlife. The modified route led them along a game trail that wound through dense forest before emerging into a series of small meadows connected by narrow corridors of trees. The terrain was more open than their original route, providing better visibility, but also making the unit more visible to any wildlife in the area. As they moved through the first meadow, Private Murphy spotted movement in the tree line approximately 200 meters to their north, but closer observation revealed only a red squirrel gathering cones for winter storage. By early afternoon, the unit had covered approximately 6 miles and was making good progress toward their first objective. The weather remained clear and warm, with temperatures reaching the predicted high of 68 degrees. The soldiers were adapting well to the physical demands of the movement, though several were beginning to show signs of fatigue from carrying heavy loads through challenging terrain. During their third rest halt, conducted beside a small stream that provided an opportunity to refill water bottles and cool overheated feet, Specialist Park noticed that Private Johnson was favoring his left ankle. Upon examination, she discovered early signs of a blister forming on his heel, a minor injury that could become debilitating if not properly treated. Using supplies from her medical kit, she applied protective padding and adjusted Johnson's bootlacing to reduce pressure on the affected area. The attention to seemingly minor details reflected the professional standards that characterized the unit's approach to training. Each soldier understood that small problems could quickly escalate into mission-threatening issues if not addressed promptly and properly. The time spent on preventive care would pay dividends in maintained unit effectiveness and reduced likelihood of serious injuries later in the exercise. As they prepared to resume movement, Staff Sergeant Walsh noticed fresh bear sign near the stream, including tracks in the soft mud along the water's edge. The prints appeared to belong to a large black bear with clear impressions of claws and pads that suggested an animal weighing between 200 and 300 pounds. More concerning was the apparent freshness of the tracks, which showed sharp edges and no sign of weathering from rain or wind. Following established procedures, Walsh photographed the tracks and reported their discovery to Sergeant Rodriguez, who plotted the location on his map and transmitted a brief report to range control via satellite communication device. The report included GPS coordinates, description of the sign, and the unit's current location and planned route. Range control acknowledged the report and advised the unit to maintain heightened awareness while continuing with their mission. The discovery of fresh bear sign added a new dimension of tension to the exercise, transforming abstract safety briefings into concrete concerns that required constant vigilance. Each soldier understood that they were now operating in territory actively used by a large predator, an animal capable of covering vast distances quickly and silently through terrain that challenged even experienced infantry soldiers. As the afternoon progressed, the unit continued northeast through increasingly dense forest, following a combination of game trails and natural corridors that provided the easiest movement through the trees. The terrain became more challenging, with frequent stream crossings and steep slopes that tested the soldiers' physical conditioning and equipment management skills. Despite the added difficulty, they maintained their planned pace and arrived at their designated bivouac site with 2 hours of daylight remaining. The bivouac site occupied a small clearing beside a creek, providing access to water while offering good defensive positions and multiple escape routes. According to their operations order, they would establish a defensive perimeter, conduct equipment maintenance, and prepare for the next day's movement. The site had been selected specifically for its tactical advantages and compliance with bear safety protocols, including adequate distance from water sources and natural wind patterns that would help disperse cooking odors. As the soldiers began establishing their night position, Sergeant Rodriguez assigned security sectors and reminded them of the procedures for bear encounters during hours of darkness. Each fighting position would be manned by 2 soldiers with designated responsibilities for observation, communication, and immediate response to any wildlife incursions. The unit's heavy weapons would be positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire while maintaining noise discipline and light discipline that would minimize their signature to both simulated enemies and actual wildlife. The process of establishing the bivouac site required approximately 90 minutes, during which the soldiers demonstrated the efficiency and attention to detail that characterized professional infantry units. Fighting positions were carefully prepared to provide protection while maintaining fields of observation. Equipment was organized and secured according to tactical standing operating procedures, and communication checks confirmed that each position could contact the command post using both radio and visual signals. As darkness approached, the soldiers conducted final preparations for the night, including equipment checks, meal preparation, and personal hygiene that would minimize odors that might attract wildlife. The evening meal consisted of military meals ready to eat, heated using small camp stoves that produced minimal light and smoke. Food preparation and consumption followed strict protocols designed to prevent attracting bears, with all food waste sealed in odor-proof containers and all cooking equipment thoroughly cleaned after use. The first night passed without incident, though several soldiers reported hearing large animals moving through the forest beyond their perimeter. The sounds were consistent with moose or caribou, both common in the area, and did not represent any threat to the unit's security. Guard duty rotated every 2 hours, ensuring that fresh observers maintained vigilance throughout the night while allowing the majority of the unit to rest. August 8th dawned clear and cool, with morning temperatures in the lower 40s and unlimited visibility. The soldiers conducted morning stand-to procedures, a military ritual that required all personnel to man their fighting positions during the half-hour before and after sunrise, when visibility conditions favored potential attacks. Although designed for combat operations, the procedure also provided excellent security against wildlife encounters during the period when many animals were most active. After conducting equipment checks and consuming a cold breakfast designed to minimize cooking odors, the unit prepared to continue their movement toward the second day's objective. The planned route would take them across more challenging terrain, including several stream crossings and a ridgeline movement that would test their navigation skills and physical conditioning. Specialist Chen, serving as the unit's primary navigator, had spent the night reviewing their route and identifying potential problem areas where navigation might become difficult. Using his GPS device and traditional map and compass, he had calculated precise bearings and distances for each leg of their movement, providing backup navigation data that would prove crucial if electronic equipment failed or became damaged. The morning movement began with a stream crossing that required the soldiers to remove their boots and wade through water that reached mid-thigh on most personnel. The current was swift but manageable, and the rocky bottom provided secure footing for soldiers carrying heavy loads. Staff Sergeant Walsh, with her experience in similar terrain, supervised the crossing and ensured that proper safety procedures were followed, including the use of rope belay and designated safety personnel positioned downstream. After successfully completing the stream crossing, the unit began climbing toward a ridgeline that would provide them with observation positions for the day's training scenarios. The ascent required 3 hours of steady climbing through increasingly dense forest, where visibility was limited to less than 50 meters in most areas. The physical demands of the climb, combined with the weight of their equipment, tested the soldiers' conditioning and determination. During their second rest halt of the day, conducted on a small bench approximately halfway to their objective, Private Murphy discovered what appeared to be a daybed used by a large animal, possibly a bear. The area showed signs of recent use, including matted vegetation and several large depressions that suggested an animal had been resting there within the past few days. More concerning were fresh claw marks on nearby trees, scratched into the bark at a height that suggested a very large bear. Staff Sergeant Walsh examined the sign and concluded that they were likely looking at evidence of a brown bear, significantly larger and more dangerous than the black bears they had been expecting in this area. Brown bears, also known as grizzly bears, were uncommon but not unknown in interior Alaska, and their presence would require modified safety procedures and enhanced vigilance. Following protocols established in their operations order, Walsh reported the discovery to Sergeant Rodriguez, who immediately called a halt to reassess their situation. Using his satellite communication device, he contacted Range Control to report the discovery and request guidance on whether to continue with their planned mission or modify their route to avoid potential bear encounters. Range Control consulted with the Fort Wainwright Wildlife Management Officer and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game before authorizing the unit to continue their mission with enhanced safety measures. These included modified movement procedures, reduced noise discipline during movement to avoid surprising bears, and instructions to immediately report any direct bear sightings or additional fresh sign. The decision to continue reflected the military's assessment that proper procedures and preparation could minimize risks to acceptable levels while still providing valuable training opportunities. However, it also acknowledged that operating in Alaska's wilderness always carried inherent dangers that could not be completely eliminated through planning and caution. As the unit resumed movement toward their objective, each soldier carried a heightened awareness of their surroundings, scanning constantly for signs of wildlife while maintaining the tactical discipline required for their training scenarios. The combination of military training and wilderness awareness created a complex mental challenge that tested their ability to process multiple types of information simultaneously. The final approach to their observation position required movement through a narrow corridor between two ridgelines, terrain that would provide excellent concealment for the unit but would also limit their ability to detect approaching wildlife until animals were very close. Corporal Kim, serving as point man, moved with exceptional care through this section, frequently stopping to listen and observe before signaling the unit to continue. At approximately 14:30 hours on August 8th, as the unit approached within 500 meters of their objective, Specialist Santos detected movement in the forest ahead of their route. Using hand and arm signals, she alerted the point man and indicated the direction of the contact. The entire unit immediately adopted tactical positions, weapons ready but not aimed, as they attempted to identify what Santos had observed. Through careful observation using binoculars, Corporal Kim identified the movement as a large brown bear, approximately 300 meters ahead of their position and moving parallel to their intended route. The bear appeared unaware of the soldiers' presence and was moving slowly through the forest, occasionally stopping to investigate scents or overturned logs that might contain food. Sergeant Rodriguez made the immediate decision to halt the unit's movement and establish an observation post to monitor the bear's activities while determining their best course of action. The soldiers moved into concealed positions that provided good observation while minimizing their visibility and scent signature. Using their training in wildlife behavior, they remained motionless and silent while the bear continued its movement through the area. For 27 minutes, the soldiers maintained their positions while observing the bear, which appeared to be a mature male weighing approximately 400 pounds. The animal showed no signs of agitation or awareness of human presence, continuing to forage naturally as it moved through its territory. Eventually, the bear disappeared into dense forest approximately 800 meters from the unit's position, moving away from their planned route. After waiting an additional 30 minutes to ensure the bear had moved out of the area, Sergeant Rodriguez made the decision to continue toward their objective, using a modified route that would avoid the area where the bear had been observed. The route modification would add approximately 45 minutes to their movement time, but would provide greater separation from potential wildlife encounters. The remainder of the day's movement proceeded without incident, and the unit successfully reached their objective, a ridgeline observation post that provided excellent views of the surrounding terrain. As they established their positions and began the afternoon's training scenarios, each soldier carried a new appreciation for the realities of operating in genuine wilderness conditions, where humans were visitors in a domain ruled by animals that had evolved for survival in one of the world's harshest environments. The evening of August 8th passed peacefully, with guard duty rotations maintaining security, while the majority of the unit rested in preparation for the next day's activities. Weather conditions remained favorable, with clear skies and mild temperatures that created ideal conditions for the tactical training exercises planned for August 9th. However, unknown to the sleeping soldiers, the bear they had observed earlier that day had not moved as far from their location as they believed. Attracted by food odors that even careful military procedures could not completely eliminate, the animal had circled back during the night and was now bedded down less than 400 meters from their defensive perimeter, waiting for daylight to resume its investigation of these unusual intruders in its territory. As dawn approached on August 9th, 2025, the stage was set for an encounter that would test every aspect of the soldiers' training courage and will to survive. The pristine Alaskan wilderness, beautiful and unforgiving in equal measure, would soon become the arena for a confrontation between human technology and preparation versus millions of years of predatory evolution, a collision that would leave its mark on everyone involved and serve as a stark reminder that in nature's domain, humans remained vulnerable visitors in a world that operated by rules far older and more fundamental than military doctrine.